Welcome to Midnight Creed. I am your host, David, tonight. The truth will not stay hidden. Kindly like and subscribe to Midnight Creed. Also tell me which part of the world you are watching from in the comments below. The mystery starts now. Chapter 1. The card left in plain sight on a wet Monday morning in April, with the brownstone on West 35th Street shut, snug against rain and discontent. Inspector Kramer arrived looking as if both had followed him in. He stood in the office doorway, broad, damp and irritated, with his hat in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other, while Nero Wolfe, who had been reading with an air of justifiable superiority over authors in general, glanced up once and shut the book. "Well," Wolfe said, that was all. He never wasted a greeting on Kramer. They understood each other too well to need politeness and too little to enjoy it. Kramer crossed to the red leather chair and sat down heavily enough to register an opinion on the springs. "You can stop looking pleased," he said. "I'm not here socially." "If you were," Wolfe said, "I should be alarmed. I had my notebook out already. A man does not have to be bright to know when the weather and Inspector Kramer have come in together there may be a corpse attached. Since I am bright, I uncapped my pen and waited." Kramer unfolded the newspaper and slapped it on Wolfe's desk. A headline on the front page announced mystery, "Death baffles police." Since the city editors of New York have always believed bafflement is more saleable than competence. That was no novelty. The novelty, if there was one, lay in the small photograph beneath, showing the doorway of an office building with 3 policemen and a knot of spectators, doing their best to look useful. "The papers call it absurd," Kramer growled. "The boys downtown call it theatrical. I call it a nuisance with ambitions." Wolfe frowned. "You have brought me a headline. I prefer facts. You'll get them." Kramer jabbed a finger at the article. "George Lowell Faber, 52, Vice President of Continental Securities, found in his private office Saturday night, with his skull cracked by a bronze paperweight from his own desk. Beside his hand was a small crimson card. No writing on it. No print. No mark. Nothing but the color." Wolfe's brows moved a little. "Crimson. That's what the paper says. And for once, they didn't invent it. The card was crimson," I said. "Plain red wouldn't have sold as many copies." Kramer ignored me. He had developed that skill over the years and polished it with dedication. That was the first. "Yesterday morning, a woman named Helen Rippin was found dead in the lobby of her building on East 57th Street. She was senior editor for Bellamy House. Stab wound. Again, there was a crimson card beside the body. No message." Wolfe set his fingertips together. "And the third?" Kramer looked at him sourly. "You know there's a third or I wouldn't be here. Dr. Martin Vale. Surgeon found dead in his car in a private garage on the west side. At first glance it looked like suicide by fumes, but the medical examiner found a blow at the base of the skull, and yes, there was another crimson card." The rain ticked against the window panes in the kitchen. Somewhere Fritz was moving pans with a moral firmness which indicated that lunch would be on time no matter how often homicide called. Wolfe sat back an inch. "These 3, he said, had no visible connection. That's the point. Finance, publishing, medicine, different neighborhoods, different associates, different habits. We've got men on their business records, their bank accounts, their relatives, their clubs, their old-school ties, and so far if they had anything in common it was breathing." "Was there a fourth?" Wolfe asked. That made Kramer blink. "Why the devil would you ask that?" "Because you are more irritated than 3 deaths would make you. Also because you said the matter had ambitions." Kramer scowled at him, which with Kramer is a form of tribute. "Yes, there was a fourth, not in the papers yet. Philip Tarrant. He did research and errands for political men who liked to keep their fingerprints off the work. He was found early this morning behind a restaurant in Greenwich Village with his neck broken, and there was a crimson card." I let out a little breath and wrote the 4th name. Wolfe closed his eyes for half a second. That is one of his most annoying habits, because it looks like meditation and often turns out to be digestion. But on this occasion, he opened them with interest sharpened. "The newspapers are wrong," he said. Kramer stared. "About what?" "About theatricality." Theatre seeks applause. Discipline seeks recognition. The card was not left there to shock policemen or amuse reporters. It was meant to chill someone who already understood it. Kramer made a disgusted noise. I came here for brains, not riddles. And got both, Wolfe said. If the card carries no written message, then its message must be prearranged. Someone among the living knows what crimson means. That got my attention more sharply than the 4 deaths had. A murderer who leaves a token for the public is vain. A murderer who leaves one for a private audience is organized, which is worse. Kramer leaned forward. You think the 4 victims all belong to some group? I think it possible. I think it more probable than coincidence, and less foolish than looking for a maniac who hates investment houses, publishing firms, surgeons, and political intermediaries with equal fervor. Kramer took a typed sheet from his inside pocket and handed it to me. That's the summary. I brought it because if I had to read it twice, I'd start arresting newspapermen. Have a look. I read while Wolfe questioned him. The facts were lean and dry. Faber had been found by a cleaning woman. Helen Rippin's body had been discovered by the building doorman returning from his supper break. Dr. Vale had failed to appear for an early appointment, and his chauffeur had gone searching. Tarrant had not been expected anywhere, which was one of the troubles with men like him. The city notices their absence only when they have already become news, Wolfe asked. Anything stolen from any of them? Number any signs of a struggle? Little or none. Any witness who saw a suspicious person? Half the city, if you believe them. Any similarity in the cards besides color? Number same size within 1/8 of an inch. Plain stock. No watermark, bought anywhere. Have your men investigated the victims' pasts? We started yesterday. Number have they investigated them deeply? Kramer's chin came up. We're not children. I know. Children are often more thorough. Confound it, Wolfe. If you want to help, help. I am, Wolfe said. Go backward, far backward if necessary. School, military service, charity boards, summer hotels, court cases, marriages, divorces, amateur theatricals, clubs, committees, sanatoriums, political campaigns, anything the connection may be old, trivial in appearance, and central in fact. Kramer stood up. He had got what he wanted and disliked the manner of receiving it. We're doing that. Then continue doing it, preferably with intelligence. Kramer turned to me. If he says anything useful after I leave, call me. He just did, I said. That's a matter of opinion. Kramer jammed his hat on, gave Wolfe a glare that would have boiled a smaller man, and went out. When the front door closed, Wolfe grunted. The fool is not a fool, but he wastes much energy proving it. You liked the card, I said. I disliked it. That is why it interests me. He sent me to telephone Sol Panzer, Fred Durkin, and Ori Cather. If Wolfe calls in all 3 operatives before lunch, it means the matter has already offended his sense of order. By 11:30 they were in the office, and Wolfe was distributing assignments with that chilly economy which makes other men feel either efficient or unnecessary. Mr. Panzer, he said, take George Faber and Philip Tarrant. Seek historical links, not current gossip. Mr. Durkin, Helen Rippin, and Dr. Vale. Mr. Cather, all 4, with emphasis on any obscure associations. Do not content yourselves with obvious categories. I do not care if they all ate oysters. I care whether they once occupied the same room under circumstances significant enough to kill for. Sol nodded. Fred scratched behind one ear. Ori smiled with a trace too much confidence. But then Ori often did that when the city promised secrets and women. After they left, lunch was served with appropriate respect for civilization. Fritz produced braised veal, brown rice with mushrooms, and a salad that made me consider forgiving several old injuries. Wolfe ate gravely. Murder, in his view, is no reason to maltreat digestion. When he had done justice to the meal, he went upstairs for the 2 hours, with his orchids, which not even homicide may abridge without penalty. That left me in the office, with the rain, the typed summaries, and the newspapers. The first 3 deaths had been fed to the public with the usual seasonings. George Faber had become a titan of finance, Helen Rippin, a brilliant and mysterious literary woman, and Dr. Vale, a fashionable physician with enemies in silk hats. The Crimson Card was getting first-class treatment. One paper called it the Scarlet Signal, another called it the Red Token. The worst of them suggested a secret society. If there had been a fifth killing before dinner, somebody would have named the murderer the Crimson Avenger and hired an illustrator. At 3:10, with Wolfe still in the plant rooms, the doorbell rang. I answered it and found a woman on the stoop who had the kind of composure that tells you either she has never been frightened in her life or she has learned to charge fear rent. She was in a dark tailored suit, expensive without being decorative, and her face was handsome by strict standards. Not soft, not inviting, but definite. Her eyes, grey or nearly so, took me in, the hall, and the weather in a single glance. "I wish to see Nero Wolfe," she said. "He is occupied. It is urgent." "That's common in this city. Come in." She entered and followed me to the office. When I offered her the red leather chair, she sat without fuss, set down a handbag of sober black leather, and removed one glove. "Your name?" I asked. "Laura Frome." No bell rang. If she noticed that, she gave no sign. "Mr. Wolfe is not available at the moment," I said. "If you tell me your business, I can decide whether to interrupt him and risk my position in the household." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a plain envelope. "This was delivered to me at noon. By post. Number left with the doorman at my apartment." She opened the envelope and handed me its contents. It was a small card, stiff stock, blank, and crimson enough to have made an editor purr. Seeing one there in our office, upright in my fingers, was different from reading about it in a typed report. It gave the room a colder shape. "Any note with it?" I asked. "Number any idea who sent it?" "Yes. That surprised me enough to show." "Good. Who?" "I do not know his name." "Lady, that's a poor way to improve my afternoon. It is the truth." Her voice remained level, but there was tension around her mouth now. "I believe I know what the card refers to. If I am right, those 4 deaths are linked to something that happened 15 years ago. That qualified as blood, which meant I could interrupt Wolfe in the plant rooms without later being boiled in oil. I used the house phone. Theodore Horstman answered, sounding as if I had interrupted an orchid in prayer. I asked him to tell Wolfe that a woman named Laura Frome was downstairs with a Crimson Card and a theory linking the 4 murders. After a moment, Wolfe came on himself. "What?" I told him. "Bring her," he said, and hung up. That was as near excitement as he ever comes before dinner. I took Miss Frome upstairs. She looked around, but not with the gawking curiosity of casual visitors. The plant room struck her, as they do everyone, with warmth and dampness and orderly ranks of bloom. Theodore was at the far bench with a spray gun in his hand, looking as disapproving as a man can, while among orchids. Wolfe stood in his yellow smock in the central aisle, large enough to seem planted. "Well," he said. Miss Frome said, "Mr. Wolfe, I am sorry to intrude here. You should speak." I handed him the card. He examined it. "Yes, I believe it refers to an incident in Connecticut in the summer of 1931, she said. "There was a core group of 5 of us that summer. 4 of that core are now dead." Wolfe turned and headed for the stairs, downstairs, back in the office. With the door closed, she told it. In the summer of 1931, she had spent 6 weeks at a country house in Connecticut owned by an elderly widow named Emmeline Vard. Mrs. Vard's nephew, Philip Tarrant, had gathered there, an occasional company of young people, shifting but with a fixed core of 5. The names, when Miss Frome gave them, matched our dead in a neat row. George Faber, then a rising junior in a brokerage house. Helen Rippin, not yet in publishing, but already literary and superior. Martin Vale, in medical school and conscious of both his brains and his profile. Philip Tarrant himself, restless, insinuating, and full of plans that made other people useful. Laura Frome, then 21, secretary to a theatrical producer, and pleased to be included wherever bright people said bright things in lazy weather. There was also Daniel Corbett, she said. He was not one of the fixed five, but he was central to what happened. Wolfe nodded. Of course. He was older than the rest of us by some years. He had talent, charm when it suited him, and no visible occupation that would pass an audit. He painted a little, borrowed often, talked brilliantly, and made enemies almost as quickly as friends. I asked, and something happened to him. Yes, her eyes went to the crimson card on Wolfe's desk and then away. Mrs. Vard owned a ruby pendant with family associations. Not great value, perhaps, but enough. One evening it disappeared from her dressing table. There was confusion, a search, and the pendant was found in Daniel Corbett's suitcase. Wolfe's voice was dry. How convenient. At the time I thought so too, but in the other direction, I believed he had been framed. By whom? I did not know. I am not certain now. Philip Tarrant accused him first. George Faber supported Philip. Martin Vale said little but enough. Helen Rippin watched, and I have often thought she knew more than she revealed. Mrs. Vard refused to call the police. She wanted silence. Daniel Corbett was ordered from the house. And before leaving, Wolfe murmured, he spoke. Yes, her hands tightened once and relaxed. He said some debts do not ask for money. He said one day we would be reminded. I asked, what has crimson to do with it? The pendant was kept in a small leather case lined with crimson silk. Daniel held it up when he protested. Philip Tarrant laughed and said the whole business deserved invitations printed on crimson cards. Helen remarked that it looked like a play arranged around a color. Wolfe looked at the blank rectangle on his blotter. And you have had no contact with Corbett since? None. Did any of the others? I do not know. Was there another survivor besides you? Someone and connected with that summer, even if not part of the fixed core? Yes, she hesitated. A girl named Sylvia Armitage. She was not part of the fixed core, but she was there several times and was present that night. She married soon after and went abroad. I lost track of her years ago. I put that down. 6 young people in Connecticut, 4 dead. 1 sitting in our office, 1 missing. It had shape now, and shape in a murder case is either a blessing or a trap. Wolfe asked, why come here instead of to the police? Because if this concerns Daniel Corbett and that summer, then Inspector Kramer will either dismiss it as a melodrama or stamp all over it until the only person left alive is the killer. That is unjust, I said. He might also do both. She gave me the first hint of a smile. Wolfe shut his eyes. I knew better than to disturb him. After perhaps 30 seconds he opened them and said, Archie, call Mr. Kramer. Tell him Miss Laura Frome is here and has provided a possible historical connection among the victims. Do not elaborate by telephone. Miss Frome said sharply, you promise nothing of the kind. I promise nothing at all, Wolfe said. I am not in the habit of concealing potential evidence from the police merely to flatter a client's nerves. I am not your client. Number not yet. That stopped her. It nearly stopped me too. Wolfe had already decided she would become one unless something prevented it, and that meant he believed there was a structure here worth buying. I called headquarters and got Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins, who said Kramer was out but expected soon. I left the message. When I hung up, Wolfe looked at Miss Frome and said, you cannot return home. She stared. What? You have received the card. If the sender expected fear, he has planted it. If he expected movement, your apartment may be watched. If he intends to kill you, your doorman is not adequate protection. She considered that without fluttering, which improved my opinion of her another notch. What do you propose? That you remain here for the present? I looked at Wolfe. He ignored me. Hospitality at the brownstone is generally extended by schedule, not impulse. Miss Frome gave a single nod. Very well. At 4:30 Kramer arrived. He listened to her story with his face arranged in the expression policemen reserve for witnesses they neither trust nor dare disregard. He took names, dates, and scraps of description. When she had done, he turned to Wolfe. "Do you buy it?" "I buy that it warrants investigation," Wolfe said. "That's your answer to everything you haven't solved." "On the contrary. When I have not solved something, it is my only honest answer." Kramer grunted. "We'll trace Sylvia Armitage, and Corbett if he's alive." "Yes, and perhaps with luck you will manage it before another corpse saves you the effort." Kramer glared. "Miss Frome comes downtown with me." "No," Wolfe said. Kramer wheeled. "No, she stays here for the present. The devil she does. She has not been arrested. If she prefers to remain in this house, that is her privilege." Kramer looked at her. "Do you?" "Yes," she said. That settled it, though not to Kramer's pleasure. He left 2 plainclothesmen outside and went off muttering things which Fritz later said sounded improper for a man in public office. By 6 o'clock the city had darkened early under the rain, and the first reports from the operatives began to come in. Saul phoned. George Faber and Philip Tarrant had indeed crossed paths in recent years. Not socially, but in the way of men who exchange usefulness quietly. Tarrant had once introduced Faber to a client who needed something arranged beyond the edge of propriety. Nothing that would hang in court, Saul said, but enough to show the old acquaintanceship had not died. Fred reported next. Helen Rippin had, during the war, edited a private collection of hospital letters for a committee on which Dr. Vale had served. They had met several times in connection with it. More interesting, Helen had received and destroyed several letters during the month before her death. The charwoman had complained about the bits in the wastebasket. Ori came in with the best morsel. Philip Tarrant, during the week before he died, had been trying to locate Daniel Corbett. That brought a silence to the office that no one liked. Wolfe said, "After the 3rd death." "Yes," Ori said. "He had begun asking around 5 days before he was killed. Not openly. He made inquiries through men who remember the sort of people everyone else tries to forget." Miss Frome had gone pale. Then Philip recognized it. "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "Or perhaps he merely recognized danger and thought an old enemy was responsible. Which is not quite the same thing." Dinner was served with more stiffness than usual. Fritz disapproves of murder at the table, and of anxious women in the dining room even more. The meal was excellent, which is Fritz's way of meeting disaster with professionalism. There was trout with almonds, potatoes done in butter and parsley, and a salad bright enough to remind us the outside world still existed. Miss Frome ate little, Wolfe ate enough. I did what I could for morale. At 9:15 Saul phoned again. This time his voice had lost the mild amusement it usually keeps in reserve. "I found Sylvia," he said. "Where?" "West End Avenue, married name Bassett. But she's using Sylvia Bain now, widow. Came back from Europe during the war, quiet life. There's a catch." There would be. A woman was asking about her this morning, dark hair, well-dressed, around 40, according to the superintendent. Wanted to know whether Mrs. Bain was expected home tonight and whether she had been in good health. I felt the nape of my neck tighten. "Is Sylvia home now?" "She was 20 minutes ago. I've got a man watching the building." "Stay there." I turned to Wolfe. He had been watching me and needed only the expression on my face, but I gave him the words. He rose an inch from his chair, which for him is the equivalent of a cavalry charge. "Then tell Saul to get Mrs. Bain out of there if necessary, by force short of felony." Miss Frome gripped the arm of her chair, too late. "Not yet," Wolfe said. I went for the telephone. That was how the first chapter closed, with a blank crimson card on Wolfe's desk. The rain still needling the windows, a missing past reaching forward 15 years to claim its debts, and somewhere on West End Avenue, a woman named Sylvia opening her door perhaps to a visitor, perhaps to death, and certainly to memory. Chapter 2. Archie starts where the living flinch. If you want facts that still have circulation in them, you begin with the breathing. The dead can be searched, measured, and regretted, but they are poor company under cross-examination. The living, on the other hand, have nerves, and nerves are always eager to help if you ask the right question and then keep quiet long enough. I started that night on West End Avenue because Saul had found Sylvia Bain and a dark-haired woman had been asking after her health in a manner too delicate for charity. By the time I got there, a squad car was parked at the curb with all the discretion of a brass band. Saul was in the vestibule with a plainclothesman from Kramer's force and a face that said the evening had not improved his opinion of people. "She's alive," he said before I could ask, and annoyed, which is encouraging. "Inside," he nodded. "Third floor. Kramer wanted her brought downtown. She declined loudly. Since nobody had a warrant and no body had turned up in the apartment, they are settling for watching her." Sylvia Bain opened her own door after I identified myself through 3 inches of chain and suspicion. She was in her middle 40s, slim, elegant in a way that had not loosened with age, and white around the mouth from recent fright. Her hair was chestnut, her eyes grey, blue, and her manner had the polished hardness of someone who had spent years making private alarms look vulgar. "Mr. Goodwin?" "Yes." She looked me over as if testing whether I could possibly be worth the interruption. "Come in. You were sent by Nero Wolfe." That is one way to put it. The apartment was careful and expensive, with books chosen intelligently, chairs chosen for use rather than effect, and a vase of tulips that had not been bought by a man. There was another woman there, broad and practical, probably a maid or companion. She withdrew when Sylvia told her to. Sylvia sat and did not ask me to. I sat anyway. "You knew Philip Tarrant," I said. A shadow crossed her face. "That seems to be a dangerous qualification this week." "You also knew George Faber, Helen Rippin, Martin Vale, and Laura Frome." That landed, not like a blow, but like a key turning in a lock she had hoped was rusted shut. "Laura has talked," she said. "She has used her voice." "Yes." Sylvia gave me a long look. "How much did she tell you?" "About Connecticut in 1931, Mrs. Vard's house, Daniel Corbett, the ruby pendant." She leaned back and shut her eyes for 1 second, then opened them. "Then she told you the decorative version. I was hoping you might have the practical one." Her mouth moved faintly, not quite a smile. "Practicality was never Philip's strong suit." "You flinched," I said. "What?" "When I named the others, you merely disliked it. When I named Laura, you flinched. That means not that Laura spoke, but that you feared she would." She looked at me, and I had her now. Not on the truth, perhaps, but on the decision whether to start protecting it. "I am not a witness in court, Mr. Goodwin. Number, you are a possible corpse in Manhattan." That did it. She rose, crossed to the window, and stood with her back to me, looking through drawn curtains at the wet shine of the street. "There was more than the summer at Mrs. Vard's house," she said. I made no sound. In November of that year, Philip Tarrant persuaded the 6 of us to meet again. He said the business with Corbett had left ugly feelings and ought to be put right. He had found, he said, a place in the country run by a man who specialized in moral correction, private reflection, and the cleansing of conscience. I said, "That sounds costly." It was. Philip did not pay. George did. I got my notebook out. Name of the place, Black Hollow House. That was a better name than most murder cases get, and a worse name than any retreat deserved. She turned from the window. It stood in the hills north of the city, not in Connecticut, but just over the line in New York State. An old estate converted for private retreats. No signs, no advertisements in the ordinary sense. The people who used it were sent there or invited by other people who preferred not to be associated publicly with the need for spiritual repair. What did they repair? Reputations, mostly. That had the right smell. Who ran it? A man named Alden Murch. He called himself a director, not a clergyman. He wore dark suits, soft collars, and a face that looked permanently sorrowful for mankind. He spoke of guilt as if it were a stain that could be lifted for a fee. Did it work? For him, yes. She returned to her chair, and this time looked older, not in skin or bone, but in weariness. The pamphlets promised silence, reflection, and the shedding of worldly corruption. They used phrases like inward renewal and private moral discipline. Philip thought it amusing. George thought it useful. Martin thought it nonsense. Helen thought it contemptible. Laura hated it. I was merely young enough to go where stronger personalities pointed. You all attended at the same time? Yes, for 4 days. And Daniel Corbett? Number, that was the point. Philip said we must settle among ourselves what had happened, and what was to be done if Corbett ever tried to make trouble. I let that sit a second. So the retreat was not for salvation. It was for housekeeping. She nodded. Yes. What happened there? She gave me the first honest fear I had seen in her. I am not sure I know. That can mean several things. It can mean ignorance, dishonesty, confusion, or memory bitten through by later knowledge. I waited. At first, she said. It seemed merely ridiculous. There were scheduled silences, private interviews with Murch, written confessions we were encouraged to make, and then seal, walks before breakfast, readings after dinner, and endless talk about the burden of concealed wrongdoing. Philip laughed at all of it until Murch spoke to him alone. After that, Philip stopped laughing. George became watchful. Helen was furious. Martin grew cold enough to frost glass. And Laura, she was frightened, more than I understood at the time. I asked, why? I do not know. That might have been true or not. I marked it for later. Did Corbett come up there? Number, are you sure? No, she said at once. I am not sure of anything about those 4 days except that when we left, we were all different from when we arrived. That was better than certainty. Did Murch know about the pendant? Yes. Who told him? Philip, I assumed. Assumed is a poor meal, but I've eaten it before. She ignored that. On the second evening, Murch said at dinner that theft is often less ruinous than false testimony. George Faber nearly dropped his fork. I remember that because it was the only time I ever saw him physically startled. Did Murch accuse anyone directly? Number, he never needed to. He spoke in veiled maxims as if he had swallowed a book of funeral verses. Did anyone confess? She looked at her hands. Not openly, and privately. I suppose that is why we were there. That was as much as I was going to get on the first pass without either roughing her or marrying her. And I had no authority for either. I asked the practical question. Did anyone besides you get a crimson card? Number, any letters recently? Anonymous messages, telephone calls? She hesitated. A week ago, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a torn scrap from one of the old Black Hollow House pamphlets. That got me forward. Where is it? I burned it. Naturally. People always destroy the useful thing and preserve the useless one. What did it say? She shut her eyes a moment, reciting from memory. In silence, the soul yields its hidden poison. That would improve any breakfast table. She didn't smile. I told myself it was a prank. You did not tell the police. Number, or Laura? Number. Why not? She met my eyes. Because if it was not a prank, I did not wish to be told what I already suspected. That was reasonable enough to be true. I left 2 policemen with instructions not to let anyone in without checking with the moon, and went back downtown through streets slick with rain and taxi lights. New York on a wet night can look either washed or guilty, depending on what you are carrying in your head. I was carrying Black Hollow House, Alden Murch, moral correction, and a line about hidden poison, none of which improved the avenues. Wolfe was in the office when I returned, seated behind his desk with a glass of beer, and the expression of a man who considers the world a badly managed enterprise. Laura Frome was there too, reading a book without turning pages. She looked up when I entered. Well, Wolfe said. I told it. I gave him Sylvia's account of the second gathering, the name of Black Hollow House, Alden Murch, the pamphlet phrases, the sealed confessions, the dinner remark about theft and false testimony, and the burned scrap in the mail. Laura Frome had gone pale by the time I reached the end. You didn't mention Black Hollow House, I said to her. No, she said. Why not? She held my gaze. Because I wanted your attention on the murders, not on a disgraceful weekend in the country run by a fraud. Wolfe snorted. On the contrary, fraud is often the only visible handle on a disgrace. Laura's voice sharpened. It was nothing. No, Wolfe said. It was not. If it were nothing, you would not have omitted it. She looked away, I said. Sylvia says you were frightened there. That struck home. Laura's hand tightened on the book. Everyone was frightened there. Of what? She answered without looking up. Of being known. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. By Murch? Yes, how? I don't know, he barked. Pafoo, you know something. She put the book down with care. Very well, Murch had information about all of us. Not merely the pendant and Daniel Corbett, but private things. George had falsified an account for a client before he was 25. Martin had altered a hospital report while a student. Helen had taken and used a manuscript that was not hers to use, though not in the vulgar sense of theft. Philip had done 3 things at least that would have damaged him if made public, and I, she finished, had done something foolish enough to be used against me. What? I asked. Number Wolfe nodded, sensibly. Continue. He spoke to each of us separately. Afterward we knew. He knew. We never discovered how, I said. Blackmail in clerical wrapping. Laura's mouth twitched. Yes. Did he demand money? Not openly. Contributions to the work of renewal were welcomed. George gave him some. Philip may have. I do not know about the others. What happened at the end of the retreat? Laura licked her lips. We signed a paper. Wolfe straightened a fraction. What paper? A declaration that the matter of Daniel Corbett's conduct at Mrs. Vard's house had been discussed in private conscience, and that the accusation against him had been made honestly and in good faith, to the best of our knowledge. I let out a slow breath. A nice clean affidavit without lawyers. Yes, did you sign? Yes, did everyone? A pause. Number, who refused? Helen, that was worth the price of the evening. What did Murch do? He persuaded her, or frightened her. The next morning, her name was on it. Wolfe's lips compressed. Did you see her sign? Number, did anyone? I do not know, I said. Where is the paper now? Laura gave a bleak little shrug. With Murch, I suppose. Or destroyed. Wolfe shook his head. Men who live by leverage do not destroy it. That was one of the truest things he ever said. The next morning I started where the living flinch. That meant not only Laura and Sylvia, who were already flinching openly, but anyone connected to Black Hollow House, who might prefer the whole thing had been drowned in a cellar years before. Saul had spent part of the night and early morning running down Alden Murch. At 10:30 he came in, smelling of cigarette smoke and disapproval. Murch is dead, he said. Died in 1938, heart failure according to papers that look decent at first glance, and less so when you keep reading. Black Hollow House closed the same year. The property was sold twice and burned partially in 1944. What is left stands empty except for birds, weather, and local boys with poor judgment. Any records? Wolfe asked. Some most vanished. But there are traces. The place was incorporated as Black Hollow Renewal Foundation. Private subscriptions, no public solicitations worth naming. Patrons included people who preferred not to have their lapses tried in print. Murch had a secretary named Ellen Dora. She is alive, 60-ish, lives in Yonkers, keeps canaries, and does not like callers. Excellent, Wolfe said. Archie, go dislike her. I went. Ellen Dora lived in a narrow brick house that had given up hope before the armistice. She admitted me because I sent up the name of a dead donor Saul had found in the records and suggested I represented unfinished business. She was thin, yellow-grey, and tidy to the point of mania, with hair pulled back so hard it must have improved her memory by tension alone. I do not discuss Black Hollow House, she said before I had fully sat down. That saves time, I told her. Neither do I. I only discuss murder. She stiffened. Murder? I gave her the 4 names. She recognized all of them, though she tried to hide it by using the old secretary trick of rearranging her face 1 second late. Mr. Murch kept no improper records, she said. I'm relieved proper blackmail is always more dignified. Her lips thinned. You are offensive. Only when invited. I let the silence work. It did. Miss Dorr rose, adjusted a porcelain dog on the mantel for no reason but nerves, and then sat again. People came to Black Hollow, she said, because they had already frightened themselves. Mr. Murch did not create sin in them. He merely recognized its uses. That was near enough to a confession for me. How did he get his information? I was not responsible for the methods. You know them. Number. Then you know who used them. This time she looked at me sharply. Why should I tell you? Because if one of Murch's old clients has started collecting the account with a blunt instrument, the police may eventually decide that his surviving employees are worth attention. That got the desired result, though not gracefully. She went to a writing desk, opened a drawer, and brought back a small memorandum book. She did not hand it to me at once. There was a man, she said, not officially connected. He came and went. Mr. Murch called him a research assistant, which was absurd. He found out things. He knew how to search old court calendars, hotel registers, hospital gossip, servants' chatter, school expulsions, and private disgrace. His name was Julian Haft. Alive, I do not know. I have not seen him since 1938. Did he know the Tarrant Group? She hesitated. Yes. Mr. Murch took unusual interest in that party. Why? Because one of them had lied. Which one? She shook her head. That I do not know, but Mr. Murch said, after their second day there, that false witness is the richest soil for fear. She handed me the memorandum book. On 2 pages were names and dates in a secretary's compressed neat hand. George Faber, Helen Ripon, Martin Vale, Philip Tarrant, Laura Frome, Sylvia Armitage, all checked into Black Hollow House on the same November weekend in 1931. In the margin beside Helen, Ripon's name was a small penciled note, resisted statement. That was enough to make the trip worth shoe leather. I got back to the brownstone a little before 1, in time for lunch and for Wolfe to complain that murder had again interfered with civilized scheduling. While Fritz served chicken with tarragon, green beans, and a pudding of potatoes and leeks that deserved a hymn, I reported on Ellen Dorr and Julian Haft. Laura Frome listened with a face that gave away nothing until I mentioned the penciled note beside Helen's name. Then she dropped her fork. She did refuse, Laura said. Wolfe nodded, and later yielded, or appeared to. Laura looked sick. I had forgotten. No, Wolfe said. You had buried. That ended table talk. Wolfe dislikes excavation of conscience over food, perhaps because he considers digestion the only reliably innocent human process. In the office afterward, he had me lay out the facts. I did so. 4 murdered victims, 2 survivors. All 6 had attended Black Hollow House in November 1931 after the Corbett accusation that summer. Murch had gathered information on each, extracted or solicited signed declarations, and inspired durable fear. Helen Ripon had resisted some statement. Philip Tarrant, before his death, had been trying to locate Daniel Corbett. Sylvia had received a torn pamphlet scrap. Laura had received the crimson card. No one wanted to discuss the retreat. Even those not yet touched by murder stiffened at its name. Wolfe drank beer and regarded the ceiling. The retreat was not forgotten, he said. It was packed away like something sharp. That is exactly how it feels, I said. Because all of them feared not merely exposure but contradiction. If the original accusation against Corbett was false, then the signed declaration became a second crime. If true, then why the present killings and the elaborate revival of memory? Mr. Corbett, or someone invoking him, is not punishing theft. He is punishing collusion, Laura said quietly. Then which of us lied? Wolfe turned to her. That, madam, is the only useful question yet asked. At 4 o'clock Inspector Kramer arrived, damp again, though this time the rain had stopped. He came in with the expression of a man who expected to be annoyed and had no wish to be disappointed. Well, I gave him Black Hollow House, Alden Murch, Ellen Dora, The Old Register, and Julian Haft. He listened without interrupting until I reached the penciled note about Helen Rippin resisting the statement. Then he said, "Where is that memorandum book?" "In my pocket," I told him. "You may admire it from here until I have a receipt." He swore at me mildly, got the receipt, and took the book. Wolfe watched him with bored interest. Kramer said, "We're looking for Haft, and for Daniel Corbett." "Good," Wolfe said. "Also look for any surviving papers from Black Hollow House, especially declarations signed by guests." "You think Murch kept them?" "I know he kept them," Kramer grunted. "Why hasn't this retreat turned up sooner?" "Because," I said, "the people involved did not forget it. They merely refused to unpack it." He looked at Laura Frome. "That true?" She met his gaze. "Yes." "Why?" Her answer was level and without ornament. "Because some places are built not to heal shame but to preserve it." That gave even Kramer pause. When he had gone, Wolfe sent Laura upstairs to rest and ordered me to begin on the practical side of Black Hollow House. Who printed the pamphlets, who drove guests there, who handled subscriptions, who inherited Murch's effects, who last saw Julian Haft, and whether any surviving piece of stationery or colored stock linked back to the crimson cards. I got to work on the telephone, and by 6 had 3 crumbs and 1 possible loaf. The loaf was this: Black Hollow House had used, for its pamphlets and private communications, the services of a small printer on East 11th Street, named Bemis and Klein, long since dissolved. One of the partners, Klein, was dead. The other, Bemis, was alive in Brooklyn and very deaf. That was for tomorrow. The crumbs were better than no supper. A chauffeur once employed there remembered a locked file cabinet removed from Murch's office the day after Murch died. He did not know by whom, only that the man was thin, wore gloves, and argued with Miss Dora on the front steps. A former gardener remembered Julian Haft because he tipped badly and watched people instead of flowers. And a retired maid who had worked weekends at Black Hollow House said the guests in November 1931 had not merely been uneasy. They had looked, in her phrase, like people waiting for a bell that never rang. At 7:30, with the lamps on and the office warm against a chill evening, I finished my report and looked at Wolfe. "Well," I said, "that is where the living flinch." He grunted. "Yes, we have advanced from absurdity to structure, and what structure is that?" "A house of concealment," he said. "First the accusation, then the retreat, then the signed statement, then silence for 15 years. Now the silence is being opened like a wound." I looked at the blank crimson card still on the side table where Wolfe had left it. It seemed smaller than before and nastier. "What next?" I asked. Wolfe shut his eyes. "Next, Archie, we discover whether Black Hollow House merely harvested fear or whether it manufactured it." That was a fair enough answer for a man sitting in a chair while I was wearing down shoe leather. Also it was true, which in my experience is the best lubricant for irritation. By then I had reported all of it. The retreat had not been forgotten at all. It had merely been packed away like something sharp, and now someone had reached back into the wrapping and started using it. Chapter 3. A Retreat for Conscience at Market. Price Nero Wolfe has no objection to conscience in the abstract. He merely dislikes its administration by committees, salesmen, or men in soft collars with a private filing system. When I came down to breakfast the next morning, with rain gone and New York, trying to look innocent under a pale sky, he was already at the table with coffee, eggs, and a face that informed the world it had again disappointed him by waking up. "Well," I said, sitting down. "Well, what?" he asked. "What miracle of insight arrived between your beer and your sleep?" "None. Sleep is not a miracle. It is a necessity. For some it is also the only period in which they do not aggravate others." That sounds like breakfast talk. Fritz set a plate before me with more authority than food requires. Laura Frome was not there. Wolfe had decided the night before that she would remain in the house for the present, and Fritz had accepted it with the grim patience of a man who can endure almost anything, If given enough sauce, he had sent Laura's breakfast upstairs, which was his way of extending hospitality without approving its cause. Wolfe salted an egg and said, "You will go to Brooklyn this morning and interview Mr. Bemis, formerly of Bemis and Klein. Learn what Black Hollow House ordered printed, how often, and whether crimson stock was used for any private communications. Also determine whether guest rosters, declarations, or pledge forms were printed there. Only that? You will also stop at the Hall of Records and arrange copies of the incorporation papers of the Black Hollow Renewal Foundation, any surviving tax filings, and any probate material relating to Alden Murch. Mr. Panzer is pursuing Julian Haft. Mr. Durkin is on Murch's financial channels. Mr. Cather is locating former servants and attendants. I prefer substance to fragrance." That's hard on Fritz. Wolfe ignored me and Archie. "Yes, sir. Do not be diverted by pious vocabulary. I am uninterested in inward renewal, moral correction, spiritual cleansing, or other merchandise sold by euphemism. Seek the mechanism." That was Wolfe at his best and worst. He saw through nonsense so fast he got impatient if it took anyone else more than a second. I finished breakfast, got my coat, and left West 35th Street for Brooklyn with a notebook in one pocket and a bad opinion of retreat houses in the other. Mr. Bemis lived over a stationery store that had outlived fashion by refusing to notice it. He was 70, if a day, with a beard like a neglected snowbank, and ears that functioned selectively, chiefly against nuisance. Since I began as nuisance, it took me 10 minutes to get promoted. The key was to put Black Hollow House and Alden Murch in the same sentence, and then mention murder. Deaf men often hear those better. "Black Hollow," he said, peering at me. "Yes, soft grey paper, cream paper, envelopes, pamphlets, order forms, donation slips, sealed statement forms, smug little place." That was promising. Sealed statement forms. Yes, fold. Over sheets with lines for signature, witness line, and a printed pledge of private truthfulness. Murch was particular about type, wanted dignity without churchiness. Fool phrase, but I knew what he meant. Guest rosters? Not printed with names, blank registers, numbered pages. Their office filled them in. Annie Crimson cards. That took longer because he thought I had asked about prison guards. When we got the language untangled, he blinked. "Crimson stock." "Yes, once or twice. Not for pamphlets. Too flashy. Small cards. Heavy stock. Clean cut. No printing." I asked my partner what idiot wanted blank red cards in 300 weight, and he said, "One who means to be remembered." That was the best sentence I heard all morning. When did they order them? He scratched at his beard. Before the war, year uncertain. Then later once more, maybe 1937 or 1938. Small batches, paid cash, by Murch. He squinted. A woman collected one order. Secretary, perhaps. Thin face, gloves, spoke like an undertaker writing invitations. Ellen Dora would do for that, any receipts. Old ledgers in back if moths haven't repented of them. They had not. After half an hour with dust, ledgers, and one hostile cat, I found entries for Black Hollow Renewal Foundation covering 6 years. Pamphlets in modest quantity, letterheads, donation envelopes, statement forms, a printed card reading "private interview by appointment only." And there it was, twice. Blank cards, crimson stock, 2 times 3 inches. One order in October 1931, another in January 1938. October 1931 fit our retreat like a key. January 1938 fit nothing yet, which meant it fit something. I copied the entries and paid for the privilege of using a filthy chair. On my way out, Bemis called after me. If Murch is in trouble, he deserves it. He's dead, then he's late, not exempt. That was Brooklyn morality at retail. From there I went downtown and spent 2 hours milking dry documents for moisture. The Black Hollow Renewal Foundation had been incorporated respectably, which is to say under names of trustees who looked clean on paper and should have been boiled alive in person. One was Alden Murch, another was a banker from White Plains. The third was a widow with money and no public hobbies. The charter language was noble enough to improve your posture, full of private restoration, ethical renewal, and humane guidance to burdened souls. The filings were thin. Donations came in. Expenses went out. No detail. But one line item repeated over the years: special consultations. That interested me. Probate papers on Murch were meager and sour. His estate was smaller than expected for a man who had harvested guilt from rich people, but that only proved he knew how to hide a crop. Personal effects were listed in broad categories: clothing, books, household items, office cabinet, contents unspecified, papers of no public value. That phrase is a bouquet laid on many graves. It means somebody took what mattered before the inventory was signed. I got back to the brownstone. In time for lunch, Wolfe was already seated. Laura Frome was present, looking less like a fugitive and more like a woman who had been forced to accept safety as a form of imprisonment. Fritz served chicken in cream with dill, rice molded with peas, and a salad containing apples so crisp they sounded argumentative. I reported while Wolfe ate. He listened with his eyes half closed, which on him means attention and on others would mean rheumatism. October 1931, he said. So the crimson cards predate the retreat. They were not invented recently to dramatize the murders. They were part of Black Hollow House stock. Laura put down her fork. Then the cards may have been used there. Were they? Wolfe asked. She frowned. I do not remember. Try harder, she bristled. That command does not improve memory. But it improves honesty. She looked at him with dislike, which is usually the first stage of Wolfe's usefulness to a witness. Yes, she said at last. They were used. Not often. Murch would leave one on a tray outside a guest's room to indicate a private interview. No writing, only the color. I said. That would do it. The card was not merely a symbol of the old accusation. It was a summons, Wolfe grunted, or a warning. At Black Hollow House, a crimson card meant that Murch wished to see you alone, which implies danger of exposure, rebuke, leverage, or all three. The murderer leaves it beside each corpse. Not a badge, but a reenactment. Laura had gone grey. I had forgotten that. No, Wolfe said. You had feared it. She ignored him. When that card appeared outside your door, everyone knew Murch had something on you, or claimed to. Excellent, Wolfe said. So the message is doubled. It evokes both the retreat and the private possession of dangerous knowledge. Mr. Corbett, or whoever invokes him, is not merely recalling the past. He is imitating its mechanism. That ended lunch conversation, which was just as well because Fritz was beginning to look like a man who might resign from gastronomy and take up murder himself. Afterward, in the office, Wolfe had me spread the copied entries, incorporation notes, and my memorandum on his desk. Saul arrived 10 minutes later with the look he gets when he has found something unpleasant and is deciding which layer of it to unwrap first. Julian Haft is alive, he said. Wolfe opened one eye wider. Indeed. In Jersey City under the name Jules Harwood, he buys and sells used office equipment, and looks like a man who would rather sell plague if the margin held. 60, perhaps. Thin, careful, suspicious. He has been visited in the last month by 2 men. One was Philip Tarrant. That gave the room a click. And the other? I asked. Saul shook his head. Unknown, tall, dark coat, hat pulled down, no useful face from the witness I got. But Haft was frightened after that second visit, frightened enough to try to move boxes from his storage room to another location. Did he succeed? Wolfe asked. My man says the boxes are still there unless he shifted them in the last 12 hours. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, you and Mr. Panzer will visit Mr. Haft today. Wolfe's eyes widened a fraction. Next year. Yes. Today, Laura said. If Philip visited him, then Philip had learned about Black Hollow House before he died. Yes, Wolfe said, and perhaps learned too much or too little. The distinction is frequently fatal. Before Saul and I could leave, Fred Durkin came in. He had been working Murch's finances and the surviving servants. Fred looks harmless enough to be trusted by women, bartenders, and idiots, which makes him invaluable. I got one, he said. A former maid at Black Hollow House now working in Yonkers. She remembered the November 1931 group because of a scene in the library. On the third night, voices raised. One woman crying. One man saying no one was leaving until it was signed. Laura's head came up. Who? Fred shrugged. She couldn't swear. She thought it was Tarrant. Laura stared at nothing for a moment. Yes, she said quietly. It would have been Philip. Wolfe nodded. And the crying woman. Laura's lips tightened. Possibly me. Or Helen, I said. She gave me a look that admitted the possibility and resented it. Fred went on. The maid also remembered that Murch kept a locked tin dispatch box inside the office cabinet. He carried the key on a chain inside his vest. After he died, the dispatch box vanished before the household inventory. Wolfe leaned back. So, not an office cabinet full of vague papers, but a specific container worth stealing. Excellent, I said. Special consultations, sealed statements, crimson summons cards, a vanished box, and Julian Haft still alive. The retreat is beginning to look less like a refuge and more like a bank. A bank of compromise, Wolfe said, precisely. That was the word for it, though at the time he had not yet embroidered it. He did so an hour later, when Saul and I had gone, and he was left to think with beer. Jersey City did not improve Julian Haft. He occupied a warehouse office that smelled of metal, paper dust, and modest dishonesty. He was thin enough to seem assembled from spare parts, with pale lashes, a hooked nose, and eyes that measured conversation by risk. "We're closed," he said when we entered. "Then open privately," I told him, and showed him enough of my license and Saul's silence to suggest several forms of inconvenience. "We want Black Hollow House." He looked at Saul first, which was intelligent. Saul can do more with a still face than some men can with a revolver. "I don't know what you mean." "You will. Alden Murch, Ellen Dorr, Philip Tarrant, George Faber, Helen Rippin, Martin Vale." At the fourth name, something in him failed to stay arranged. "Not much, just enough. I sell filing cabinets, which makes you a spiritual heir to Murch." He did not like that. "What do you want?" "The truth." "That's expensive," I smiled. "Try the wholesale rate." We sat. He remained standing for a while, then sat too, because men who stay standing too long in their own offices begin to feel theatrical. "I gathered information," he said finally. "That's all. Murch wanted to know what his guests were carrying. He said people do not confess to improve. They confess to be handled. Handled how? Depends on the client. Some wanted absolution. Some wanted assurance that others were equally compromised. Some wanted leverage over business partners, heirs, wives, rivals. Murch provided a setting where truth could be performed and then contained." Saul said. "Contained by whom?" Haft licked his lips. "By all of them." That was the clever part. If 6 people confess in the same closed system, and each signs something touching the others, no one can expose the machine without being crushed by it. There it was. Wolfe would have liked the phrasing if he hadn't already had the idea. "What did the signed papers say?" I asked. "Varied. Some were confessions. Some were affirmations. Some were witness statements made to support a version of events. Murch tailored them." "The 1931 group?" He hesitated. Saul spoke for the first time in 3 minutes. "Don't," Haft swallowed. "That group was unusual. Murch said one accusation had become unstable. He wanted a mutually reinforcing record. He prepared a statement concerning the Corbett matter and related testimony from the guests." "Who signed?" "All but one at first." "Helen Rippin," I said. His eyes shifted and confirmed it. "Yes." "Did she sign later?" "So it appeared." "Appeared." He looked at me and then away. Murch could imitate a hand when necessary. That made me sit very still. "You saw him do it." "Number, but I prepared exemplars. Old signatures from hotel registers, letters, donation slips. He liked to practice. Then Helen Rippin's signature on the final statement may have been forged. Yes, and the others. As far as I know, genuine. As far as you know, I repeated. Where are those papers now? I don't know. Bad answer. It's the only one I have. After Murch died, someone took the dispatch box. I was not first. Who was? I don't know. Who visited you recently? He gave me a nasty look. Philip Tarrant, like you said. He wanted to know whether the 1931 documents survived. I told him maybe. He didn't believe me. And the second visitor, I don't know his name. He asked the same question. He was more direct. How direct? Half touched his jaw. There was faint yellowing near the hinge. Ina, I said. Description. Tall, medium build, overcoat, hat-controlled voice. Educated, could have been 40 or 60. How useful. Did he mention Corbett? Number did Philip. Yes, that mattered. What did Philip think? He thought Corbett had finally come back for a reckoning. I told him if Corbett had sense, he would have stayed lost. Did Philip say why he cared now? Half laughed once without humor. He said because 3 people were dead, and he was tired of pretending memory had no address. That was good enough to carry home. We leaned harder, but not enough to break him. Haft had no dispatch box. Or if he had, Saul was good enough to know it was not on the premises. What he did have was fear. Not the melodramatic kind, the practical kind that keeps a man near exits and under aliases. Before we left, he said, "You tell whoever is asking that Murch never trusted paper alone. He used duplicates." I turned, "Where?" Haft shook his head. "I don't know, but he always said institutions require redundancy." That was a line worth passing to Wolfe. Back at the brownstone, evening had come down blue, grey over the street. Fritz fed us calf's liver with onions, spinach, and a potato dish delicate enough to make apology seem inadequate. Laura ate with us, silent, except when spoken to. She looked at me once, and I knew she wanted the report, but not at table. Wolfe wanted it too, but his code against murder served with liver is firmer than statute law. In the office afterward, I gave it all to him, Bemis and Klein. The crimson cards ordered in October 1931, private summons, by color, the foundation finances, the special consultations, Julian Haft, alive, Philip Tarrant's visit, the unknown second visitor, the dispatch box, the likely forgery of Helen's signature, the principle of mutual compromise, the possibility of duplicates. Wolfe sat with his hands on the chair arms, eyes narrowed. At last, he said, a machine. Respectable people coming in with private filth and cash in advance. Yes. He turned to Laura Frome. Now listen, madam. Black Hollow House was not a retreat. It was a clearinghouse. Guests did not purchase redemption. They purchased controlled jeopardy. Each learned enough of the others to become obedient. Each was burdened not merely with private disgrace, but with shared risk. That is stronger, Laura whispered. Yes. Wolfe's voice sharpened. A man burdened with his own shame may defy, escape, or confess. A room full of interconnected shames becomes an institution. Mr. Murch understood that. He did not cure conscience. He collectivized it. I looked at him. That's one for a brass plate. Pupfoy, Laura said. If Helen's name was forged, then she may have known it. Or learned it later, Wolfe said, which could explain her resistance and perhaps her later fear. Could the others have known? I asked. Yes, or suspected. That would make the system unstable, particularly if one original witness began to doubt the accusation against Corbett. Laura turned to me. Helen did doubt it, not at first, later. How do you know? She hesitated, then said, because in 1936 she wrote me a letter after seeing Philip at a dinner. She said some old signatures had started to itch. Wolfe's eyes flashed. Where is that letter? I destroyed it. I closed my eyes. There are times when a bonfire would improve civilization. She ignored me. I did not understand then how much she meant. "Number, good heavens," I said. "This entire case seems to have been handled by people who believed burning paper could erase history." Wolfe grunted. "No, Archie, they believed silence was cheaper than truth. Often they are right for a time." The doorbell rang. He went. Inspector Kramer entered with Sergeant Stebbins and the air of a man carrying news he did not enjoy. His eyes went to Laura, then to Wolfe. "We found something," he said. "That must have surprised you," Wolfe told him. Kramer ignored it, a storage room in Jersey City tied to Julian Haft. "We got there a little after you left." "Goodwin, someone had been there before us. One lock broken, one box gone, another ripped open. No body. Not yet. But there was a paper scrap left under a crate." He handed it to me. It was a torn strip from old cream stock with typescript on it. Only 7 words remained legible. "I have spoken truly." To the best. Wolfe held out his hand. I gave it to him. He studied it. "From one of the statement forms," he said. "Yes," Kramer said, and beside it was a blank crimson card. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Then Wolfe looked up. "Mr. Kramer, the retreat sold not moral improvement, but shared danger. Its real currency was compromise made mutual enough to enforce obedience. Someone is now liquidating that old currency." Kramer scowled, in English. "In English, 1 or more of your dead were killed because the old papers matter, and the surviving papers matter more. Do you know who has them? Number. Then spare me the lecture." Wolfe's lips moved. "Very well. Spare me the incompetence." Kramer took a breath that would have powered a furnace. "We're putting men on Haft." "Too late," Wolfe said. "If the second visitor wanted documents, he has either got them or frightened Haft into flight. Find duplicates. Murch kept them." Kramer looked at the torn scrap in Wolfe's hand, at Laura Frome's face, and then at me. "Get ready," he said. "This is opening." After he had gone, with Stebbins trailing behind like a discontented conscience, the room remained tight and still. The crimson card lay on Wolfe's desk beside the torn scrap from the statement form, the old machine and the new murders touching edges. "Well," I said, "a retreat for conscience at market price." Wolfe snorted. "Conscience was never the commodity. Fear was. Conscience merely supplied the packaging. That was chapter enough for one day. We had the mechanism now, if not the operator." Black Hollow House had been less a refuge than a market where respectable people purchased not redemption, but shared danger. Truth gathered in a closed room had become currency, and currency does not die when its banker does. It waits for a new hand to spend it. Chapter 4. The Oath Beneath the Silence. There are times in a case when New York seems to consist entirely of people who would rather remember a funeral than a conversation. Black Hollow House had got to that stage. The more names we found, the more silence acquired branches. It was no longer merely the old 6 in Connecticut, and at the retreat. It was printers, maids, chauffeurs, secretaries, donors, and one greasy little man in Jersey City who had sold himself the useful fiction that information belongs to whoever survives it. The morning after Kramer brought the torn scrap from Haft's storage room, Wolfe told me at breakfast that I had made one mistake. "That narrows it nicely," I said. "Which one?" "You accepted Alden Murch as founder." "I used the word manager once. You used it lazily. Black Hollow House had to begin before it could be managed. Find its begetter institutions of coercion are seldom invented by the man whose name appears on the stationery. They are inherited, adapted, or stolen. That sounds like a family motto. It is history." He buttered a piece of toast with the concentration he reserves. "For acts requiring order," then added, "seek not merely the house and its papers, but its origin, who first conceived a retreat where private shame could be supervised for profit. That person, even dead, may still explain the method. So I am looking for the grandfather of respectable extortion." Yes, that phrase, while vulgar, is accurate. Laura Frome was at the table, pale but composed. She had slept in one of the front rooms upstairs and was beginning to wear safety with resentment. That was natural enough. People who fear death rarely enjoy the arrangements that postpone it. she said. If Murch was not the first, then he may not have made the rules. Precisely, Wolfe said. She looked at him. And if he inherited them, others may have inherited the records. Precisely again. Take care, madam. Repetition of accuracy can become habit, forming. That got the faintest flicker at the corner of her mouth. Fritz saw it, disapproved of amusement at breakfast, and set down the coffee pot, with enough firmness to remind us that scrambled eggs deserve more attention than wit. I started with incorporation records again, but farther back and sideways. If Black Hollow Renewal Foundation had been the official garment, there had likely been an earlier shirt underneath. By noon I had 2 useful items and 1 annoyance. The annoyance was the clerk at the county records office, who thought a request for old estate transfers could be slowed by dignity. The first useful item was a deed history showing that the property later called Black Hollow House had been leased, 10 years before the foundation was incorporated, to an entity called the Voss Character Institute. The second was the name Martin Voss. That was enough to carry to Wolfe, but I held it until I had something warmer attached. I got it from a retired county registrar in White Plains, who remembered Voss because Voss had once tried to explain to him that legal secrecy was a moral service. Men remember that sort of thing the way dogs remember a boot. The registrar told me Voss had been a smooth operator, not a clergyman, not a doctor, and not exactly a fraud in the easy sense, because he did provide what many of his clients wanted. He took in troubled sons, indiscreet wives, weak nephews, over-drinking bankers, frightened politicians, and women with letters in the wrong hands. He offered private reformation, confidential counsel, and the chance to tell the truth where it would be heard by persons as compromised as oneself. He healed character, I asked. The registrar snorted. He arranged it. There's money in arranging character for people who can afford not to have theirs examined in daylight. That sounded like our line of work if you put it in a mirror and charged extra. I next located a former kitchen maid from the Voss years, then another former employee who had once served as secretary. The maid knew almost nothing except that certain guests left with red eyes and envelopes. The secretary knew much more and wished to share none of it. She was named Agnes Pell, now married and widowed, living in Queens in a house that had curtains too thick for taste and a front parlor that smelled of dust, starch, and old caution. She admitted me only after I told her I was not from the police, which was not wholly reassuring to either of us. She was past 60, stout, neatly dressed, and looked like a woman who had spent 30 years correcting other people's margins. I resigned from that place, she said before I could open my notebook. I was not dismissed. Fine, I said. Let us call it a moral separation. She gave me a hard glance. You talk too lightly for the subject. That's because if I talked as heavily as it deserves, the floor might fail. That did not soften her, but it kept her from showing me the door. I put down names: Martin Voss, Alden Murch, Black Hollow House, Crimson Cards, 4 murders. At the mention of the cards, she went rigid. It was clean and instant, like a nerve touched with a pin. So, I said, you remember those? Her hands moved once in her lap and then were still. I remember too much. Good start with Voss. She sat without speaking for perhaps 10 seconds. I let them go by. Silence is often the best pry bar. Martin Voss, she said at last, called himself a physician of the moral injuries. He was no physician. He had read enough psychology to misuse it, and enough theology to imitate tone. He was handsome in a tidy way. Smooth, careful, never hurried. He believed every soul has 2 prices, one for vanity and one for fear. That's a useful creed. It made him money. She had begun now, and I let her take the slope at her pace. Voss had leased the old estate in the early 20s, and opened it first as a private country rest house for selected guests. Rest became reflection, reflection became character work, and character work became a fixed business. Rich people do not object to confession if you promise it will remain expensive. Voss learned early that the clientele he attracted did not want absolution. They wanted management. They wanted to tell enough to ease themselves and hear enough from others to make silence prudent. When Murch came, Agnes Pell said. He did not invent the system. He improved its filing. That was a sentence Wolfe would have admired like a good knife. What system, exactly? I asked. She looked at me as if deciding whether I was coarse enough to deserve accuracy. Then she said, select guests would be gathered in small groups, usually 6 or 8, chosen not by innocence but by use. Their troubles had to be different enough to interest, close enough in class to avoid scandal, and dangerous enough that each would value discretion. They were encouraged to speak in supervised sessions, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes by suggestion, sometimes because Voss or Murch already knew enough to make refusal more painful than admission. Who listened? Others in the group, sometimes only Voss. Sometimes Voss and one secretary to keep the sealed records in order. I was once that secretary. Did they sign confessions? Sometimes, more often statements, clarifications, affirmations, acknowledgements. It varied with the purpose. The point was not always legal. It was relational. That was a pretty word for mutual hostage-taking. Go on. She drew a breath. At the end of each season there was a private ceremony for selected guests. Not all. Only those considered securely useful. It took place in the library after midnight. Doors locked, curtains drawn. No servants admitted. There an oath was taken. I said nothing. She went on, and her voice had changed. It was flatter now, not because the memory had dulled, but because it had not. They swore silence over what had been confessed, witnessed and signed. Silence not only toward the world outside, but toward one another except under conditions approved by the House. The sealed records, they were told, would never leave the library safe except upon their joint destruction or in case of grave moral necessity. That phrase came from Voss? Yes. He liked phrases that sounded holy and acted commercial. Did you ever see the oath? I typed versions of it more than once. Did it mention a crimson card? Her eyes moved to mine. Not in the oath, in the ceremony. That gave me a mild but genuine lift. How? Each guest was handed a small crimson card before entering the library. No names, no writing. It meant admission under silence. During the oath, the cards were placed in a silver bowl on the library table. When the oath was done, each guest took his own card back and kept it or destroyed it. I never knew which. I sat very still. That was our dead men's token now. Not a flourish, but a badge of return. Why crimson? Agnes Pell shook her head. Voss said white was for innocence, black for mourning, and red for spectacle. Crimson, he said, is the color of memory disciplined by shame. I still remember that, because I hated him for saying it. That would have earned Martin Voss a slap from Archie Goodwin and perhaps an award from a bad poet. When did you leave? After Murch took over fully. Voss had become ill or frightened or merely tired. I do not know which. Murch changed the tone, less performance, more pressure. Voss preferred suggestion. Murch preferred records. Did the oath continue? Yes, more rarely, but yes. Did you attend the November 1931 group? Number I had left by then. Then how do you know the oath continued? She hesitated. Because another secretary told me. Name? Lydia Bell. Aliv. I doubt it. She coughed herself half to death in those years. Did she mention one particular group of 6 connected to a false accusation? Agnes Pell looked at me sharply, then away. She said there was one party in which the library ceremony went wrong. One woman would not repeat the final language. One man tried to force the matter. Another threatened to leave. Murch intervened. Afterward, Lydia told me she had never seen a room so full of people who needed each other's silence and despised one another for it. That was better than a census. Do you know the names? Number think. I have thought for 20 years. She might have, or she might have thought for 5 minutes and charged the rest to caution. Either way, I had enough. Before I left, I asked the question that often produces more than a direct attack. What became of Voss? Dead, she said. Late 20s or early 30s stroke, they said. But before that, he disappeared from the house for periods. He was afraid by then. Of what? She looked at me and gave the honest answer. Of his own method. He had built a machine that made people obedient until someone realized that the keeper of the secrets was merely the first hostage. That was first. Rate and I took it home. Wolfe was in the office when I got back, with Saul Panzer opposite him, Fred Durkin near the globe, and Laura Frome in the corner chair pretending not to listen. I delivered Agnes Pell in full, and Wolfe sat as still as a carved Buddha with gastric preferences. When I had finished, he said, "Good, the crimson card is no invention of the murderer. It is a sign taken from the ceremony." Laura spoke before I could. Then the cards left beside the bodies are not merely warnings. They are indictments. Wolfe turned to her. Close. They are summonses fulfilled. Each corpse has already answered the card. That chilled even me. Saul had something too. He had spent the morning with former staff, former donors, and one undertaker who had once handled Voss's papers after the original man's death. The undertaker remembered little, except that a locked dispatch case had been removed from Voss's rooms before burial and later turned up in Murch's office. So Murch inherited more than a business, I said. Yes, Wolfe said. He inherited the archive and the ritual. Fred added his portion. One elderly gardener from the Voss years remembered seeing late night lights in the library at season's end and hearing, through a partly opened service passage, the murmur of repeated phrases. He had made out only 3 words clearly, because they were spoken by all voices together. Which words? Wolfe asked. Fred checked his notes. I will bury. The office stayed quiet for a second after that. Laura had gone chalky. Yes, she whispered. I remember now. Wolfe's head turned. Speak, she swallowed. In the library. After midnight, Murch stood by the table. Philip was there. George, Martin, Helen, Sylvia, and I. We each had a crimson card. Murch said the house kept no prisoners and no innocents. He said truth heard together must be buried together. We repeated lines after him. What lines? I do not recall them all. Recall what you can. Her hands clasped and unclasped once. Something about silence freely undertaken, something about witness shared, something about refusing the corruption of disclosure. She closed her eyes, and at the end, yes, I will bury what has been spoken, witnessed, and sealed, unless all who bear it consent or judgment finds me first. That was a nice, clean oath for a sewer, I said. Did you all repeat it? Her eyes opened. Number, Helen, yes. What did she do? She stood silent. Philip told her not to be childish. Martin said, if she had come that far, she might as well finish it. George told her the whole point was to settle matters. Sylvia cried, I think I did too. And then, Wolfe asked. Murch dismissed the others for a minute and spoke to Helen alone at the window, very quietly. She went white. When he called us back, she repeated the final language. Wolfe grunted, threatened. Yes. By what? I do not know, or perhaps I do and cannot isolate it. At Black Hollow House all threats merged. Your own others, the houses. That was the problem with institutions built of secrecy. Everything inside them acquires one odor. Kramer arrived soon after. Because fate had decided our afternoons should not be wasted on calm. He came in with Stebbins and a folded note from one of his men. Julian Haft had vanished. No surprise. More interesting, the storage room lease had been paid 6 months in advance by Philip Tarrant in cash. That ties Tarrant tighter, I said. Kramer nodded. He had found Haft and expected something to turn up. Also, he added, turning to Wolfe, we located one old employee from Black Hollow House before you could. She says there was some kind of midnight ceremony in the library with selected guests, oath of silence. Wolfe's eyes half closed. Yes, Kramer scowled. Don't do that. Do what? Sit there as if everybody else arrives late to your thoughts. You do, I intervened before homicide improved the statistics. We've got more. The crimson card was part of the ceremony. Admission token. Badge of participation. The victims were not marked at random. They were being recalled under the oath. Kramer looked at me, then at Laura Frome. You knew this, and didn't say so. Laura met his glare. I did not remember until now. He snorted. That line ought to be printed on witness chairs. Wolfe rumbled. Memory is not a cupboard, Mr. Kramer. It is a battlefield. That almost made Kramer forget to be annoyed. Almost, he said. All right. Then what's the oath got to do with murder now? Wolfe spread his fingers on the desk. Everything. The killer is not a madman ornamenting corpses. He is reactivating an old moral contract. The crimson card was the symbol of entry into the closed system of Black Hollow House. To leave it beside the dead is to say, you were summoned, judged, and found answerable under what you swore to bury. In English, Kramer said. In English, Wolfe replied. Someone who knew the ritual is killing the participants and using the house's own sign to terrify the survivors. Kramer's eyes moved to Laura. Or one of the survivors is killing the others. That was fair enough. Though I did not care for the direction of his head, Laura said coldly, if I had wished to terrify myself, Inspector, I should have remained alone in my apartment. Kramer grunted. People do stranger things. Did everybody in that library swear? No, she said. Not at first. Helen Rippin. Yes, and maybe never if the signature was forged. That landed in the room like a tack. Kramer turned to Wolfe. You believe that? Mr. Haft says Murch could imitate a hand. Then somebody learned it. Or feared it. Kramer stood up and paced once, which in our office is like a bear trying not to damage furniture. So we've got an old retreat where people told each other shameful stories, swore silence, signed papers, and now 30 fists of yesterday are flying around and knocking them down. Your gift for compression remains remarkable, Wolfe said. Confound you. Number confound the dead, the liars and Mr. Murch. Sit down. Kramer did not, but he stopped pacing. What next? Wolfe's answer came without pause. Find any surviving duplicate of the oath or statements. Discover whether Voss or Murch lodged copies outside the house. Learn who from the 1931 group benefited most from continued silence, and identify the unknown second visitor to Haft, who sought the same documents as Philip Tarrant. Kramer frowned. That's not next. That's everything. Precisely, it is a comprehensive case. After he left, taking Stebbins and his resentment with him, Wolfe sent Laura upstairs and told me to get beer. That meant he wanted to talk without witness nerves in the room. I brought the beer and sat. Well, I asked. The oath explains the card, he said. And the panic. Yes, not because oaths are sacred, but because they organize fear. The participants at Black Hollow House were not merely blackmailed individually. They were taught to regard disclosure as mutual destruction. That is stronger than blackmail. It becomes self-policing. A room full of disgraces becomes an institution, I said. He glanced at me. For once you listened. I make a living at it. He drank beer. Voss began it. Murch regularized it. The library ceremony converted confession into covenant, not a legal covenant, of course, a psychological one. Each person left knowing that exposure might come not from the house, but from another participant under pressure. Therefore all became wardens. Then the killer is using the oath more cleverly than Murch did. Perhaps, or merely more brutally. I thought about the silver bowl of crimson cards, the library at midnight, and 6 young people repeating burial language because another man had arranged their shame into a circle. What bothers me, I said, is this: if the oath was the glue, why wait 15 years to crack it open? Wolfe closed his eyes. Because for 15 years it served someone. That sat there. After a moment I said, and now it doesn't, exactly. At dinner Fritz gave us roast duck, red cabbage, and small potatoes turned in butter until they shone. Laura came down and behaved well enough to make Fritz almost regret disliking all this. Conversation stayed mostly on the duck because Wolfe had ordered it so. But after coffee in the office the case twitched again. The telephone rang. I answered and got Saul. His voice was low and quick. "I've got something on Martin Voss," he said. Before Black Hollow, he worked under another name in Boston at a private rest institute that went under after one guest shot himself and another sued. Voss disappeared, turned up in New York, and started again with fresh stationery. "Do you have the other name?" "Yes, Martin Voss was born Martin Vossler." "Anything else?" "One of the old donors says Voss used to refer to the library ceremony as the binding." That was worth bringing straight to Wolfe. I did, and he nodded once. "Of course he did," Wolfe said. Laura asked from the corner. "The binding?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "A vulgar but accurate title." Mr. Voss understood symbolism and market value. He sold private danger under ceremonial language. The oath, the cards, the sealed records, the locked library after midnight, all stage properties in a commerce of fear. Laura's voice was almost inaudible. "Then every card left beside a body is the binding reopened?" Wolfe's eyes went to her. "Yes." I looked at the blank crimson card still kept in the office, that neat rectangle of disciplined color. It no longer seemed theatrical at all. It seemed administrative. That was worse. Near 11, as the city thinned to late traffic and distant horns, Wolfe finally said what had been building all day. "The crimson card is not a madman's flourish," he said. "It is the symbol of that oath made visible again. It tells the survivors that what they promised to bury is rising, one corpse at a time." Nobody contradicted him. There was nothing in the room strong enough to do it. I went upstairs late, and before sleeping I stood at the front window of my room, a minute, looking down at West 35th Street. The lamps made gold pools on the pavement. A taxi slid by. Somewhere a drunk was proving philosophy to a stoop. In the brownstone everything was quiet except for the faint old house sounds that mean wood and pipes are minding their own affairs. But under the quiet, there was the library at Black Hollow House, after midnight. Locked doors, 6 young faces, 1 silver bowl, and the words "I will bury." When an oath is sensible and honest, men break it for money, love, fear, convenience, or breakfast. When an oath is rotten from the beginning, they break it too late. The difference is usually counted in bodies. Chapter 5. The dead were chosen by sequence. The police had been looking sideways, which was natural enough for policemen because the living city lies sideways. Bankers to bankers, editors to editors, surgeons to surgeons, and political fixers to their own breed. But Nero Wolfe, having no obligation to wear out shoe leather or municipal patience, had been looking backward. There is an advantage in being seated. One can insist that time is a direction. He began it at breakfast with a pear, not by throwing it, though Kramer has more than once deserved fruit. Wolfe was cutting it carefully, while Fritz hovered near enough to disapprove of the universe and far enough to preserve dignity. Laura Frome was there, eating very little. I was eating enough for 2 because the day looked industrious. Wolfe put down his knife and said, "Archie, bring the names." "Which names?" "We have an assortment." The 1931 group at Black Hollow House. All 6 also, every date connected with their admission, signatures, interviews and departures, arranged them on paper. "I had them yesterday. You had facts, I want order." That is Wolfe's notion of distinction, and often a useful one. I finished my coffee, got up, and brought from the office the notebook sheets, copies from Agnes Pell, the memorandum book from Ellen Dorr, as noted before Kramer had confiscated the original, and my own memoranda from Laura and Sylvia. Wolfe remained at table and watched while I spread them like a poor man's tarot. George Faber, Helen Rippin, Martin Vale, Philip Tarrant, Laura Frome, Sylvia Armitage. "We know they were there together," I said. "We know they signed in. We know there was a library ceremony and some sort of oath. We know at least one statement concerned, Daniel Corbett, and may have included forged material. We know 4 of the 6 are dead." "And in what order?" Wolfe asked. "In the order they happened to get murdered, unless Providence printed a schedule. Number in the order they entered the machine." Laura looked up. "What do you mean?" Wolfe dabbed his lips and turned to me. "You have been careless, Archie. The ledger. I have notes from it, not the ledger. Then use your notes with more intelligence. That was a regular Wolfe breakfast. Fritz took away the plates with the look of a man who believed all investigation ought to wait until after marmalade, and we went to the office. Once there, I pulled a fresh sheet and began arranging. From Ellen Dora's memorandum book and Agnes Pell's recollections, and one copied line from the county registrar's old guest filing summary, I had arrival dates and approximate times for the November 1931 retreat. Not all exact, but enough. George Faber had arrived first, early afternoon Friday. Helen Rippin had signed in 30 minutes later. Martin Vale followed shortly after. Philip Tarrant came fourth, Laura Frome fifth, Sylvia Armitage sixth, arriving late and much upset by weather. He had shut his eyes, which meant he was either thinking or insulting me inwardly. "Well," I asked. "Now the deaths," he said. I listed them. George Faber first, Helen Rippin second, Martin Vale third, Philip Tarrant fourth. The room got still. Laura saw it first. Her face lost color by degrees, not all at once. "Oh," she said. "Yes," Wolfe murmured. "Oh, I checked my paper again, though there was no need. Faber, Rippin, Vale, Tarrant, first four arrivals, Laura and Sylvia still living, fifth and sixth arrivals." I looked at Wolfe. "That is not a harvest. It is attendance. It is a roll being called," he said. Laura gripped the arm of her chair. "Then I am next." "Yes," Wolfe said, "unless the sequence is interrupted." She took a breath, steadied it, and asked the practical question. "By what? By knowledge, by error in the killer, or by our intervention? That narrows it. It is not intended to comfort." I picked up the paper again. "This means the targets were not chosen by profession, friendship, or later convenience. The killer is reciting the old ledger, or something derived from it," Wolfe said. "But yes, a judgment by sequence, very old-fashioned, quite bureaucratic. That was one of his good qualities. He can make a terrifying thing sound almost petty, which helps you touch it without losing your fingers." I telephoned Kramer. He was out. I got Pearlie Stebbins and gave him enough to make his ears stand up. "Tell him this exactly. The four dead matched the first four names in the 1931 Black Hollow House arrival ledger. The order of murder follows. The order of signing in on arrival. Laura Frome and Sylvia Bain are fifth and sixth," Pearlie said. "Holy smoke." "Yes, pass it on." I hung up and found Wolfe watching me. "What now?" I said. "Now we prove it. That helps. It is also necessary." Saul Panzer arrived within 20 minutes, because Wolfe had summoned him earlier on another errand and Fortune had finally decided to show some manners. Fred Durkin followed. Ori Cather was out on a line involving one former donor with a long memory and a short temper. Wolfe gave Saul the ledger sequence and had him verify every time mark possible from surviving records, staff recollections, and any transport or hotel data. Fred was to sit on Sylvia Bain and make sure no summons card became a corpse card. I was assigned Laura Frome and the practical side of sequence. "Practical side," I said. "Meaning what?" "Meaning," Wolfe said, "who had access to the arrival ledger, who remembered or copied its order, who has used sequence as discipline before, and why the sequence begins with arrival rather than confession, oath, or departure. That last part is yours." "Of course." Saul left without comment, which for him means interest. Fred merely nodded. Laura sat very straight and tried not to look like the fifth mark on a list. She failed, but only to me, and only because I had the list in my hand. I spent the morning with Laura and Memory, neither of them cooperative. We sat in the office, with the November light grey at the windows and the brownstone making its old wood sounds around us. Wolfe had gone up to the plant rooms, leaving me to do the human labor while he attended to orchids more trustworthy than clients. "Tell me about arrival day," I said. Laura frowned. "That was years ago." "Yes, and now years ago is killing people who came first, who signed, who watched." She closed her eyes, not theatrically, but to look inward without distraction. "George came first. Philip had told him to be early because there were financial arrangements to discuss with Murch. Helen came next and complained of the drive. Martin arrived irritated at the whole scheme. Philip himself came after them because Philip liked entering scenes after others had begun them. I came with him, or just after. Sylvia was last because a tire burst on the road. That fit what I had. Did Murch greet each of you? Yes, Annie's special ritual at arrival. A private interview scheduled for some rooms assigned. Meals announced. The card system explained. Who got cards that first day, she thought. George did. Helen may have. I received one late that evening. Martin too, I think. Philip, of course. Order. She looked at me sharply. You think the order matters there too? I think anything old and organized matters. She shook her head. I cannot say. No use grinding the same patch at once, I shifted. Who had copies of the ledger besides Murch, or the house staff? I do not know that anyone had copies. Philip Tarrant might have. She gave that fair consideration. Yes, Philip liked records, especially if they could later become favors. And George? George liked any paper that might one day become leverage. Martin Vale. Martin liked certainty. I do not know whether he liked paper. Helen. Number she hated institutions and their forms. That matched her resistance and also complicated it. People who hate such systems can be caught by them, all the harder once they have entered. At noon, Saul phoned. He had verified the order from a second source. A livery service bill from November 1931 listed deliveries to the house in exactly the same sequence. George Faber first run, Helen Rippin second, Dr. Vale third, Philip Tarrant fourth, Miss Frome fifth, Miss Armitage sixth. Time intervals close enough to sit under the murders like one transparent sheet over another. Good, I told him. You have made Laura's day. I'm glad to be useful. I passed it to Wolfe when he came down for lunch. He listened, grunted, and ate roast chicken with chestnuts and a purfie of celery root in a silence that meant the case had begun to arrange itself in him. Fritz noticed and became calmer. He prefers murder when it starts behaving. After lunch, Wolfe took coffee in the office instead of going at once upstairs, which meant the sequence had hooked him hard enough to trespass on habit. Archie, he said, list possible records that preserve the order. Arrival ledger, livery bills, room assignments maybe, meal seating perhaps, staff memory. Also any later statement drawn from the order. Laura said, at dinner the first night we were seated by arrival. Wolfe turned. Indeed. Yes, George at Murch's right. Helen next, Martin opposite. Philip beside Mrs. Bell, the secretary, me beside Martin, Sylvia near the end. Who said so? Murch, he said. Arrival fixes perspective. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. The charlatan had style. And malice, Laura said. Style and malice are not mutually exclusive. I added it to the sheet. Arrival order used at dinner, possibly in interviews, possibly in ceremony. If the killer was following the ledger, he was following not merely a list, but the house's own arrangement of precedents. At 3 Kramer came in, carrying temper and a new hat. He threw both into the office, though only one was visible. You might have told me last week to line them up by arrival, he barked. If I had known it last week, Wolfe said mildly, I would have told you this morning. Kramer looked at the papers on the desk. We checked. It holds those 4 dead are the first 4 names in the old sign in order, I said. Then congratulations. The police and we now agree on arithmetic. He gave me the glance reserved for insects with salaries. And Frome is 5th. Yes, Wolfe said. We've got 2 men outside and 1 on the back. She can't stay here forever. Number, but she can stay here for now. Kramer grunted. Bain is being watched too. She doesn't like it. No one likes being watched except actors and fools, Wolfe said. Kramer planted his fists on his hips. All right, what does it mean? That the killer is not improvising. He is reciting. The sequence comes from the house, so the motive comes from the house. It also means the killer had access to a trustworthy record or memory of arrival order. Which could be any surviving participant, Kramer said. Or anyone who obtained the papers later, I said. Kramer glared at Laura. When did you remember the order? She met him coolly. Today, when Mr. Goodwin pushed. Convenient. Wolfe's voice hardened. Control your stupidity, Mr. Kramer. If Miss Frome were the killer, she would be a rare fool to arrange murders in a pattern that places herself next. Kramer snorted. Some killers enjoy that. Then bring me one, and I will classify him. That ended the drift toward idiocy. Kramer sat, which is always progress. Wolfe said, the important question is why arrival order? Why not order of signatures to the oath, or order of private interviews, or order of involvement in the original accusation against Corbett? I said, because arrival is objective, harder to dispute. Good, Laura said, or because arrival means entry, the moment one crossed into the house. Wolfe turned his head toward her. Also good. Kramer looked from one to the other as if he had entered a grammar class by mistake. You think the killer is punishing them for entering? No, Wolfe said. I think he is invoking the institution's own record of admission. You came in this order. You will answer in this order. It is judgment wearing clerical bookkeeping. Kramer grumbled. Wonderful. He had brought something too, and after a suitable period of resisting generosity he produced it. One of his men had found a former handyman from Black Hollow House who remembered that certain locked files were periodically recopied, with one summary sheet kept separate from the main archive in case of fire. What kind of summary? I asked. Names, arrival order, room numbers, interview marks, special notes. The handyman saw it once when he was fixing a desk in Murch's office. Wolfe leaned forward. Where was it kept? In a thin black ledger or folio. He's not sure, said Murch. Used it like a map. I said, a map is enough. Wolfe nodded. If that summary survived, the killer may be working from it, particularly if the main documents are harder to interpret. Kramer rose again, because sitting had failed to improve him. We're still hunting Haft, and anyone else connected to those files. Excellent, Wolfe said. Also hunt the unknown second visitor to Haft. He now matters more than ever. After Kramer left, taking his hat and most of the oxygen, Wolfe sent Laura upstairs and kept me. You have missed something, he said. That is becoming a household refrain. The sequence does more than identify targets. It also identifies opportunity. Whoever began killing knew that each successive death would increase fear in the next two names, if and only if those next two could recognize the order. I stared. So the killer expected Laura and Sylvia to see it, or one of them to see it, and the other to be told. Then why send Laura the card only after Philip died? Because before Philip died the pattern would still be arguable. After the fourth death, it became undeniable. That was sound enough to make me uncomfortable. Which means the card to Laura was not the first warning. The murders themselves were the warning. Precisely. I thought of George Faber, found with his skull broken, Helen Rippin on a lobby floor, Martin Vale dead in his car, Philip Tarrant in an alley 1, 2, 3, 4, not random victims but called names. Then Sylvia may know it now too. Yes, and if she is intelligent, she is terrified. Fred is with her, for which, if he is alert, civilization may remain grateful. At 5 Saul came back in person. He had 2 useful items, and looked too dryly amused to be carrying only one. First, he said, the arrival order is confirmed from a third source, a laundry tally from the house list's room delivery initials in the same sequence on the first evening. Second, there was a practice at Black Hollow House of numbering guest trays in order of arrival for the first 24 hours before shifting to room service by room number. I blinked. That place worshipped sequence. Yes, Saul said. One former servant, said Murch, believed first placement in a system establishes moral relation. Wolfe snorted. Pomposity and administration, the ideal marriage. Saul went on. And there's this, Philip Tarrant, when making inquiries before he died, asked not only about Corbett and the statements, but specifically whether any arrival records survived. That put a better edge on it. Then Philip had already suspected the sequence. Or feared it, Wolfe said. Sol nodded likely. He also asked one source whether the 5th and 6th still knew their places. That made the back of my neck tighten. Did the source know what he meant? I asked. Number I do. So did Wolfe. He reached for beer, which is one of his ways of acknowledging a fact with respect. At dinner, Fritz served sweetbreads with mushrooms, rice, and asparagus tips. Laura came down, looked at me once, and knew from my face that the sequence had hardened, rather than softened through the day. She ate very little. Wolfe ate enough. I did what circumstances allowed. In the office afterward, I laid out the full progression in a clean chart for Wolfe. And because once a pattern goes visible, you want it where everyone can resent it equally. George Faber, first arrival. Helen Rippin, second arrival. Martin Vale, third arrival. Philip Tarrant, fourth arrival. Laura Frome, fifth arrival. Sylvia Armitage Bain, sixth arrival. Laura stared at the sheet. It reads like a classroom register. No, Wolfe said, like a docket. She drew a breath. What if the killer never intends to reach 6? Then the sequence is theater, but I do not think so. Why not? Because 4 murders are excessive if symbolism alone is desired. 4 establish purpose. That was pure Wolfe. He can make even murder sound statistical. The telephone rang. I answered. It was Fred from Sylvia Bain's apartment. She knows, he said. What? The order. I didn't tell her. She got there herself. She asked me this evening whether George had been first at the house and Philip fourth. When I asked why, she said because if so, Laura would die before she did. Is she holding up? Adequately, which means badly. Stay on her. Gladly. She has good coffee and no illusions. I passed it to Wolfe. He grunted. Good, the killer calculated correctly. The survivors can read the roll, Laura said in a low voice. Then he wants us to wait. Yes, Wolfe said. Waiting is part of the punishment. I went to the front room and looked out at the street for a minute. West 35th was ordinary enough. Men walking, cabs moving, light in windows across the way. But inside the office behind me there was an old list from 1931, stretching across 15 years to choose bodies by turn. There are murderers who act from rage, greed, panic or pleasure. This one was administrative. He was checking names. When I returned, Wolfe was speaking to Laura. You must tell us anything else structured by order, he said. Arrival seating, interviews, signatures, departure cards, any progression, she thought. On the first day, Murch interviewed us in arrival order too. George first, then Helen, then Martin, then Philip. I remember because Philip complained about waiting. Were there cards for those interviews? Yes, crimson cards on trays. And the oath? Wolfe asked. We stood in a half-circle in arrival order. He nodded. Good, the sequence was ceremonial from the beginning. I sat down. So the murderer is not simply using an attendance list. He is restoring the house's own ranking. Yes, Wolfe said, which suggests either reverence for the institution or hatred shaped by intimate knowledge of it. Those are opposite motives, frequently adjacent. At 11, with Laura sent upstairs again, and the house settling toward night, Wolfe had me remain a little longer. Archie, he said, what is the most important consequence of this sequence? That Laura's life expectancy is insulting, but beyond the obvious, I thought. That the killer had to know, before the first murder, not just who was in the 1931 group, but their exact order of entry and its significance. That narrows the field to survivors, house staff, document holders, or someone instructed by one of them. Yes, and that the murders were planned as a complete set, not improvised one by one. He nodded. Better. And one more thing. Philip Tarrant had figured enough of it to ask about the 5th and 6th, so Philip may have been trying to warn Laura and Sylvia, or trying to save himself by confirming where he stood. Wolfe's eyes half closed. Excellent. He understood the role and died forth, which means the killer did not alter pace when recognized. That implies confidence, I said. Or urgency. Perhaps. He took a sip of beer. The dead were chosen by sequence. Therefore, the sequence itself is motive made visible. The police look for relations in later life because that is where corpses lie. But the true relation lies at the point of entry into Black Hollow House. The killer is not selecting by convenience. He is reciting an old attendance record like a judgment. There was nothing to add to that, except the human part, and I added it anyway. Then we had better break the roll before it reaches 5. Wolfe looked at me, and for a rare second, the sarcasm was absent. Yes, Archie, we had better. That was where the chapter closed for me. We had not caught the hand leaving the crimson cards, but we had caught its rhythm. The victims belonged to the same final season at Black Hollow House, and the deaths followed the exact order of their names in the old arrival ledger. No random harvest, no profession, no friendship, no public scandal. A roll being called from an institution built on buried truth, and Laura Frome's name next in line. Chapter 6, the last session in the locked library. When a case begins to move under its own weight, even Saul Panzer looks less bored. He came in a little before noon with rain on his hat brim, city dust on his shoes, and the expression of a man who had found something he did not admire and intended to charge extra for. Wolfe was in the office because the weather had shortened his tolerance for orchids, and Laura Frome was in the corner chair, with a book she had now been reading for 3 days without making visible progress. I was at my desk arranging papers into categories that would have frightened a sane clerk. Saul took off his hat, nodded to me, gave Laura one cool glance and said, "I've got the groundskeeper." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Aliv, yes, barely enthusiastic about it, name of Ezra Phelps. He worked at Black Hollow House from 1929 through 1933, lived in a cottage by the lower drive, and remembers weather better than faces, which in this case helps. There was one storm-heavy night in November 1931 when shouting came from the library. Laura's book closed in her lap without her noticing. I said, "The final session." "Yes, the one after midnight." Wolfe pointed. "Sit, speak." Saul sat. Phelps says the house was quiet that night, until around 1 in the morning. Then voices rose in the library. One man loud, angry, not Murch. Another voice trying to hush him, a woman crying. Phelps went round the service path, because he thought perhaps a window had come unlatched in the storm. He didn't get near enough to see inside, but he heard one sentence clearly because it was shouted. He paused. Saul knows how to pause without showing off. It is one reason Wolfe values him. "Well," I asked, "I'll leave now and expose the whole enterprise, unless my papers are returned and those signatures burned." Laura had gone white, Wolfe said. Whose voice? Phelps did not know, but he later heard from a maid that the man was a lawyer. The name she used was Daniel Kerr. That changed the air in the room at once. We had been circling Daniel Corbett for days, and now another Daniel had stepped out of the walls. I said, "Kerr, not Corbett. Not according to Phelps Kerr." Laura spoke, and her voice was thin. "There was a Kerr." All heads turned. She stared at the blank wall over Wolfe's globe, as if something written there had only now become legible. "He was not with us in Connecticut," she said. "He came only to Black Hollow House." Wolfe's tone sharpened. "Why did you not mention him?" Her eyes shut once, then opened. "Because I had forgotten him." I made a noise. She looked at me. "Number, listen to me, I had not forgotten a man. I had forgotten a role. He was not one of us. Not exactly. Philip brought him in after the first day. He said Kerr was a lawyer and advisor, someone who could help settle the Corbett matter in a way that protected everyone." Wolfe's lips compressed and did it. Number Saul said. "Phelps remembers one more thing by morning Kerr was gone, at least from the house. The staff were told he had left before dawn because of urgent business in the city. But Phelps saw no car leave by the main drive, and in that weather he would have heard it." I asked. "Any record of Kerr signing in?" "None surviving. Not in the copied summaries, not in what Dora remembered, Not in anything Kramer has shown so far. Vanished from the records, Wolfe murmured. How tidy. Laura leaned forward. He did sign something, I remember now. Not the ledger perhaps, but papers. He argued with Murch on the second day over language in a statement. What statement? Wolfe barked. She drew a breath. The declaration about Daniel Corbett and the pendant accusation, Kerr said the wording went beyond honest recollection. He said it turned uncertainty into a tested fact. That was enough to make me sit straighter. So he was there to sanitize, and then objected to the cleaning fluid. Yes. Why? I do not know. Perhaps because even lawyers have a point beyond which they prefer not to step. Wolfe grunted. Some do, rarely. I turned to Saul. Anything else from Phelps? Yes, the storm broke a branch near the lower path around 2 in the morning. Phelps and another man cleared it before dawn. He says at first light, Murch himself came down from the upper lawn in an overcoat with mud to the hem and ordered them to leave the side carriage path untouched until later. Phelps thought it odd because the path was rutted. Wolfe sat back. Good, very good. Laura stared at him. Good. Yes, mud is often more sincere than memory, I said. So what do you make of it? Wolfe turned to me. Not yet. First, more facts. Miss Frome, tell us exactly what you remember of Daniel Kerr. That was the next hour. Laura had to be pushed, not because she wanted to conceal him now, but because the memory lay under others like a page stuck in a wet book. Bit by bit it came free. Daniel Kerr had arrived at Black Hollow House on the second afternoon. After the first round of interviews, he was around 35, dark-haired, compact, precise in speech, and wore clothes that suggested city law practice rather than country withdrawal. Philip Tarrant introduced him as a friend who understood confidential matters. George Faber seemed relieved by his presence. Helen Rippin disliked him on sight. Martin Vale treated him with chilly attention. Sylvia cried after speaking with him once. Laura herself had thought him sharp but not cruel. Did he know Daniel Corbett? Wolfe asked. I do not know. Did he say why he had come? To protect all concerned. That was Philip's phrase. Fool, Kerr's phrase. Laura thought. Number Kerr said his function was to ensure no one signed what could later destroy them. That gave Wolfe a look I recognized. A fact had moved. So, he said softly, a lawyer entered an institution built on compromising papers and objected to the drafting. That would make him inconvenient. I said, especially if he later demanded his own papers back and other signatures destroyed. Laura's hands tightened. You think he was killed? Wolfe turned his head. I think it increasingly probable. Kramer arrived before lunch and was told at once. He listened to Saul's report, Laura's additions, and Wolfe's silence, which irritates him more than argument, because it makes him feel he is paying rent to thought. Kerr, he said. We've got no dead lawyer named Kerr tied to the place. Have you looked? Wolfe asked. Kramer glared. Now we will. Look not only in New York City, Wolfe said. Mr. Phelps mentions storm mud, side path, and disappearance from records. If Kerr was killed at Black Hollow House, the body may have been staged elsewhere as accident or suicide. That's a nice broad field. It is the correct field. Kramer wheeled on Laura. You're telling me there was a seventh person present during the crucial session, and you only now remember it. Laura met him with more composure than he deserved. I am telling you that memory under fear is not an index. I'm getting tired of that sentence. Wolfe barked, then stopped needing it. Kramer looked ready to burst a vessel, but Saul intervened by handing him the practical thing, which was a slip of paper with Ezra Phelps's address, and the name of the maid who had first used Kerr's name in his hearing. Kramer took it and went off with Stebbins, muttering the kind of remarks that improve city air by dilution. Lunch was delayed 15 minutes, which Fritz held against crime in general and lawyers in particular. We ate fish in white sauce, potatoes with parsley, and a salad containing walnuts that were better behaved than anybody in the house. Wolfe forbade further talk of murder until coffee, which Laura obeyed and I violated twice. Back in the office, he had me bring all papers relating to the November 1931 retreat and lay them in temporal order. Wolfe likes events aligned the way some people like silver polished. It helps him see where dirt is pretending to be pattern. We had it now like this. 6 original attendees from the Connecticut business, invited to Black Hollow House for managed conscience. On the second day, a lawyer, Daniel Kerr, appears, introduced by Philip as advisor. Statements drafted or revised. Helen resists Kerr, objects to wording. Final midnight session in the library, shouting threat to expose the enterprise unless papers are returned and signatures destroyed. Storm outside, Kerr gone by morning, no surviving formal record of his presence. Later, over years, silence. Then murders by arrival sequence among the original 6. Wolfe drank beer and looked at the sheet. The retreat did not produce moral renewal, he said. It produced accomplices. Laura went rigid. Number? Yes, Wolfe said. Whether knowingly or ignorantly, willingly or in panic, the participants left tied, not merely by mutual shame, but by shared concealment of a grave event. If Kerr died that night, and the survivors accepted the fiction of his departure, each became vulnerable to the other's silence. I said, and to Murch. Above all to Murch. He would then possess not only confessions and forged statements, but a homicide hidden under collective terror. Laura whispered, I did not know. Wolfe's eyes moved to her. Probably not at once, but you knew something had happened. She said nothing. Speak. She swallowed. In the morning the house felt altered. Not solemn, controlled. George Faber would not look at anyone. Martin was very pale. Philip seemed brisk in a false way. Helen was sick and stayed in her room until noon. Sylvia clung to me, Murch said. Mr. Kerr had been called to the city unexpectedly. No one asked questions. Because? Wolfe asked. Laura's voice was low. Because all of us were already frightened by the papers, I said. A room full of private disgrace becomes very obedient when a body may be attached to it. She closed her eyes. Yes, that was the ugliest truth yet, and probably the central one. At 3 Saul returned from a second round on Ezra Phelps with a detail that made Wolfe almost purr, though on him it comes out as a deeper grunt. Phelps remembered a car after all, Saul said. Not leaving before dawn, arriving near dawn, a dark sedan from the lower road, not the main drive. 2 men in it besides the driver. He saw them because lightning flashed. One of the 2 seemed slumped or leaning badly. I said, that could be our lawyer on his way to a second address. Or his body, Saul said. Any idea where the lower road leads? Yes, toward the old quarry turnoff, and farther down, the county road to White Plains. Wolfe nodded. Excellent. Search for accident reports in that county and adjacent ones within 3 days of the retreat. Single-car wrecks, falls, drownings, unidentified males, deaths on roads after storm conditions, and any lawyer named Kerr, or even unnamed body later identified otherwise. I looked at him. You think staged accident? Yes. It is the simplest post hoc arrangement for a man inconveniently dead in a retreat library. Kramer telephoned at 4:30, and I put him through because refusing would only have brought him bodily. He had already found one possible line. A man named Daniel Kerr, attorney admitted in New York in 1923, had disappeared from his office practice in late 1931. Not widely noted, because he handled confidential private work and had no important relatives. Officially, he had died in an automobile accident on a county road north of the city after his car struck a tree during a storm. Case closed at the time, no public fuss. I repeated it aloud for Wolfe and Laura. Laura gave a small sound, not quite a gasp. Wolfe said, of course. Kramer came on hot. Of course. We're checking whether it's the same Kerr. It is, Wolfe said. You don't know that. I do not need certainty to recognize elegance in corruption. A lawyer threatens exposure at Black Hollow House during a stormy midnight session. By morning, he has supposedly left. Within days or hours, a lawyer named Daniel Kerr is found dead in an auto accident after a storm. It is the same man unless God has a childish sense of symmetry. Kramer snorted. We're pulling the old file. Do so. Also examine whether the body was damaged in a manner consistent with pre-existing violence. We may not have much left to examine. Then examine the original report for what was not examined. When I hung up, Laura was staring at the crimson card on the side table as if it had become a witness. You think we all knew, she said. Wolfe shook his head. Number, I think. Each knew enough to fear asking what the others knew. That is stronger. Murch did not need certainty. He needed distributed panic, I said, and that would bind them more tightly than the oath. Laura spoke slowly, as if each word had to be carried up from depth. On the morning after the session, Murch met each of us alone before breakfast. Wolfe's head snapped up. At last, why did you not say so? I remembered the interviews. I had not set them after the night in my mind. He spoke to me in the little morning room. He said we had all been through a trial of conscience and must now show steadiness. He said panic creates narratives more dangerous than truth. He said if anyone spoke rashly, private confessions and witness statements could be forced into public light with terrible consequences. There, Wolfe said. There is your institution, I asked. Did he mention Kerr? Number not by name. Did he imply anything had happened? Yes, number I do not know. He implied that disorder had visited the house and that wise people would not multiply it. That was Murch all over, from what we knew of him. He would never say murder if panic and paperwork could do the work. Evening came in with a yellow-grey sky and a wind hard enough to make the front windows mutter. Fritz gave us braised beef, noodles, and carrots glazed to a moral shine. Laura hardly touched it. Wolfe noticed and ordered her to eat more, which from him is practically tenderness. She obeyed because argument would only have improved his appetite. After dinner, the old county accident file arrived in spirit, if not in paper, through Kramer by telephone, and then in person because he distrusts the telephone when facts begin to smell expensive. He entered with the folder in his hand and laid it on Wolfe's desk as if laying down a challenge coin. Daniel Kerr, he said. 36, attorney. Found dead in his sedan off County Road 9 the morning after a storm in November 1931. Car into a tree on a side bend. Local doctor called it accidental, likely loss of control on wet road. But the old report notes something interesting. He opened the folder and jabbed a finger. There was bruising at the jaw and throat noted as possibly from impact. No autopsy beyond the county doctor's external examination. No relatives pressed. No reason at the time to dig deeper. Wolfe nodded. And the timeline. Close enough to sit in your lap. He was last reliably seen in the city 2 days before. Then silence. Then the wreck. Saul, who had returned and was leaning in the doorway, said, "The lower road from Black Hollow would have joined County Road 9. Kramer looked at him, then at Wolfe. So, you were right. Happy? No, Wolfe said. Merely confirmed. Laura had both hands clasped so tightly the knuckles showed white. He was killed there. Wolfe turned to her, probably. Whether in the library or later that night after removal from it remains to be determined. But yes, the structure is plain. Kerr threatened exposure. Kerr died. The house denied his presence. The participants submitted to silence under threat to their own confessions and witness statements. I said, and because each thought his own ruin tied to concealment. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. Kramer looked sour. That means the survivors from that night are not just witnesses to old nonsense. They're parties to covering a homicide. Not necessarily with full knowledge, Wolfe said. Do not be crude. Complicity admits gradations. Dead is dead. Yes, but the psychology matters. If Miss Frome believed only that a dangerous scandal and a man's unexplained disappearance were somehow linked, she would still be controllable without knowing murder. Mr. Murch understood such distinctions perfectly. Kramer grunted. Fine, then what do these new murders mean? Revenge for Kerr instead of Corbett? Perhaps both, Wolfe said, or one under the name of the other. We still do not know who now possesses the old records or why the roll is being called at this moment rather than 10 years ago. But we know more of what lies under the oath. That was the heart of it. Until then, the oath had seemed nasty enough. A silver bowl and a formal burial of truths. Now it had a foundation beneath the silence. There was a dead lawyer. After Kramer left, Wolfe kept Saul, Laura, and me in the office and sent for beer. The room was warm, the lamps low, the street outside noisy enough to remind us that ordinary New York still existed. Inside, ordinary had packed and moved. Wolfe looked from one to the other of us. Let us state it plainly, Black Hollow House did not produce moral renewal. It produced a network of vulnerable people disciplined by shared danger. During the final private session of that season, Daniel Kerr threatened to expose the enterprise unless papers were returned and signatures destroyed. He was then killed, probably that night, and the death staged elsewhere as accident. The remaining participants, whether they knew the full fact or only its shadow, bound themselves to silence, because each believed his own disgrace, tied to concealment. Laura whispered. Accomplices. Yes, Wolfe said. The house manufactured them. I looked at the papers on the desk. George Faber, Helen Rippin, Martin Vale, Philip Tarrant dead in sequence, Laura fifth, Sylvia sixth, Daniel Kerr beneath them all like a hidden beam. And somewhere, if Wolfe was right, Daniel Corbett too, or at least the old accusation that had fed the whole machine. So the last session in the locked library, I said, was not an oath service. It was the birth of a conspiracy. Wolfe lifted his beer. Exactly. That was where the chapter closed. We had gone down a floor in the house of the case and found the cellar, not repentance, not correction, not even ordinary blackmail. A lawyer brought in to regularize a lie had threatened the wrong men in the wrong room on the wrong night, and by morning, the retreat had converted its guests from frightened sinners into silent partners. Once that happens, time does not cure anything. It merely stores it until one corpse after another begins to call the roll again. Chapter 7. A card meant for one pair of hands, Inspector Kramer, having at last admitted that the murders were not a hobby, but a structure, reverted at once to his natural appetite for a culprit with a visible grievance and ordinary blood in his veins. He wanted a bereaved relative, a ruined son, a deserted wife, or a man who had carried old wrongs so long they had loosened a screw. Kramer respects madness more than system, because madness at least has the decency to look untidy. Wolfe had already left that behind. At breakfast, he said, so in terms likely to improve no one's digestion except his own. The police, he said, seek a hot motive attached to a simple hand. They will be disappointed. These cards, these murders, this sequence, all indicate a colder animal. Laura Frome was at table, eating a little more now because Wolfe had ordered it twice, and Fritz had joined the campaign by the method of looking personally injured whenever she left food on the plate. I was halfway through kidneys and toast and not yet ready for zoology. Colder how? I asked. Instrumental. The crimson card appears at every scene. Yes, but always placed where it will be found quickly and reported publicly. Therefore, the true audience is not the police. The police are merely the carrier. That makes the newspapers the envelope. Yes, the card is shown to the city so that one or more specific persons will see it. Laura set down her coffee cup. Sylvia and I, perhaps. Not necessarily chiefly. That got my attention. You think the cards are not mainly for the next victim in the sequence? Wolfe buttered toast with a patience he never extended to human beings. I think the next victim is one audience. But the design is broader. The card is left where it will be discovered at once, photographed, described, and repeated. That is inefficient if the purpose is simply to mark a corpse. It is efficient if the purpose is to exert pressure on someone still alive. Pressure to do what? Something not yet done, Laura said quietly, and someone with enough memory to understand it. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. That gave me a morning's work. Wolfe had me take all surviving names connected to Black Hollow House, not merely the 1931 core, but later select attendees, trustees, donors, special consultees, and the political and financial intermediaries who had used the place without admitting it. Saul had already worked some of them. Ori had pieces of others. My job was to prod the remainder and see who flinched not at murder in general, but at the library in particular. "Look for the wrong fear," Wolfe said as I got my coat. "That helps." It should. Most people questioned in a murder inquiry feared death, scandal, arrest, inconvenience, or newspaper mention. I want the one who fears a room. That was a fair Wolfe instruction, vague as fog and exact as geometry. I started with 2 old donors, one retired banker, a widow with too much composure, and a former trustee who had forgotten morality without losing money. All gave me variations on distaste, caution, and selective deafness. Black Hollow House had been a private correctional retreat. It had offered counsel. Murch had been severe but effective. Voss before him had been a gentleman. No, they knew nothing of library ceremonies. No, they had never received crimson cards. No, they did not wish to discuss sealed records. That last phrase got me a blink from the widow, which I noted for later and left, because she was 70 and not likely to be our cold animal unless she could climb fire escapes. By 4 in the afternoon, I had spoken to enough well-dressed evasions to begin admiring honest crooks. Then I got the name Harold Dane from Ori Cather by telephone. "Political fixer," Ori said. "Not public office, but he oils men who have it. Knows district leaders, minor judges, labor fellows, publishers with side appetites, and the sort of lawyers who keep their hats on indoors. He crossed with Philip Tarrant often. There's a guest notation for him at Black Hollow in 1934, and again in 1937, under special conference. Any staff memory? One former maid remembers him because he tipped in silver and never smiled. Also because Murch once said, "Mr. Dane already understands the library." That was good enough. Address? Ori gave it to me. Madison Avenue office. Private entrance, brass plate small enough to look modest and expensive enough to lie. Harold Dane was about 50, maybe a little past, with a polished narrow face, iron grey hair, and the kind of clothes that try hard to suggest they were bought for durability rather than effect. Men like him traffic in other people's doors, and always know which ones open inward. His office reflected him exactly. No warmth, no clutter, no visible papers except one file in the precise center of the desk as if displayed for legal portraiture. He let me in with caution and no hospitality. I know Nero Wolfe by reputation. That makes one of us. I know you by connector lines. I dislike connectors. Then you're in the wrong trade. He did not smile. Men who smile for a living often stop when they get home. I sat without invitation because I prefer not to begin behind score. He remained standing a moment, then sat too. "You have questions," he said. "Yes, Black Hollow House." His face did very little, which in itself was useful. "I attended once or twice for consultations," he said. "A disagreeable place, run by disagreeable men for people who confused secrecy with wisdom." "That sounds informed." "It is." "Did you know Alden Murch?" "Moderately." "Martin Voss?" "A name only." "Philip Tarrant?" "Yes." "Daniel Kerr?" At that one something happened. Not much. A pause, one beat too long. Then a blink. Then the eyes steadied. "Number tree again." "Number." I let it pass and came at the side. "You attended in 1934 and 1937 under special conference notation." I have no idea what notation any secretary used. "Did you ever participate in the midnight library ceremony?" His eyes sharpened as if a blade inside had been touched. "Number," you answered fast. "Because the question is ridiculous." "Yes, ridiculous things are often worth answering slowly." He leaned back. "What is this really about?" 4 murders with crimson cards left beside the bodies. George Faber, Helen Rippin, Martin Vale, Philip Tarrant. I read newspapers. "And you remembered Black Hollow at once." "Number, you remember the library." That landed. He said nothing. I stood up and wandered to the window because sometimes the back of your head helps more than your face. Madison Avenue was busy below. "All proper movement and expensive urgency," I said. "Most people I've asked dislike the house, hate Murch, resent the old pressure, and wish the whole thing had burned sooner. You are the first who has not denied memory of the library, only the ceremony. He spoke too quickly. I denied both. Number, you denied the ceremony, and then waited to see whether I would supply the library. After I did, you got uncomfortable. That means you know it matters. He said in a dry voice, "You are tiresome." That's my best feature. Silence sat there. He could have ordered me out. He didn't. Men in his line often feel safer with a known nuisance than an unknown one. Finally, he said, "I attended Black Hollow House in connection with political damage control. Nothing more mystical than that. Murch believed sealed knowledge could stabilize difficult men. There's a slogan." Dane ignored me. I was never one of his penitents. I was consulted on 2 situations involving public exposure, that is all. Did one of those situations involve the 1931 group? Number, did Murch ever show you records from that group? Number, did Philip Tarrant? Another pause. Number, I turned from the window and looked at him. You're lying, in a careful office voice. I am ending this interview. Then answer one thing before I go. Has Wolfe mentioned the library to anyone? He had not meant to say it that way. It came out not as challenge but as need. I looked at him. Why does that matter? His mouth tightened at once. I asked a hypothetical question. Number, you asked the wrong one twice. That froze him, because he had asked it twice. Once in words, once a minute before with his eyes when I first said library. Mr. Dane, I said softly, what in the name of all discreet corruption are you waiting for? He rose. Get out. I went. There are times to push until the hinges fail, and times to let a frightened man stew in the odor of his own choice. On the way downstairs, I knew one thing cleanly. Harold Dane was not afraid of becoming a corpse next week. He was afraid of something that might happen before his turn came, and of Wolfe, having already named it back at the brownstone. Wolfe was in the office with beer. Laura was upstairs. Fritz was in the kitchen arranging dinner with the cold concentration of a man who understands sequence better than murderers do. Well, Wolfe said. I gave him Harold Dane complete. Political fixer, Black Hollow consultant, denial too swift, reaction to Kerr, and above all, the question about the library twice. Wolfe's eyes half closed. Good. Very good. I assume you enjoy this because it doesn't involve walking, among other reasons. Dane is scared, but not the way Laura or Sylvia are scared. He is waiting. Yes. For what? For pressure to ripen. I sat. That's a line. I was hoping for a noun. Wolfe shook his head. The cards are not warnings of future death alone. They are instruments of pressure. Mr. Dane knows that. He expects the sequence to force him into some final act before his own turn ever arrives. That was sound enough to irritate me. What act? Wolfe drank beer. Perhaps delivery of documents. Perhaps destruction of them. Perhaps contact with a person presumed lost. Perhaps confession. Perhaps something more practical. And Dane knows which. Or suspects. I considered it. He isn't one of the 6 in the arrival sequence. Number, therefore, the role does not threaten him by order. It threatens him by consequence. If the sequence reaches Laura and Sylvia, the old 1931 structure is exhausted. Thereafter, all ancillary holders of knowledge, records, or leverage become exposed. That would include Dane. Yes, particularly if he has something now. The bell rang then, and because life had become cooperative only in bad ways, it was Inspector Kramer. He came in with Stebbins and enough impatience to season a roast. You've got another frightened citizen for me, he said. We may, I told him. Harold Dane. Kramer frowned. Who, political fixer, connected to Tarrant, attended Black Hollow as consultant in the mid-30s, knows the library means something and tried hard not to show it. Wolfe added, he is not your killer. Kramer glared. I hadn't even accused him yet. You would have saved time. Then what is he? A secondary custodian, or a broker, or a man who accepted entrusted material and now fears being compelled to use it? Kramer planted himself in the red chair. Explain. Wolfe did. He gave him the public card logic again, but this time cleaner. The crimson cards were left where they would be found at once, reported widely and printed. That was unnecessary for intimidation of the immediate victim, but ideal for reaching a distant informed watcher, someone who knew the Black Hollow ritual, knew the 1931 sequence, and understood that each public murder increased pressure toward a final exchange. Dane's fear of the library showed he was one of that informed set. Kramer listened, which is not his finest skill but improves with necessity. So you think the cards are meant for Dane? Not exclusively, Wolfe said, but significantly. One pair of hands, perhaps among others, is expected to move because of them. What hands? Mr. Dane's. Move how? That is the question, I said. He asked twice whether Wolfe had mentioned the library. Kramer looked at me, those exact words. Close enough to convict a twitch, then he's hiding something. Yes, Wolfe said, and not merely memory. He fears the library being named because the library points to a specific repository, oath, or transfer he has connected with his own danger. Kramer grunted. You talk like a deed. That is because deeds are often relevant. Kramer rose. I'll put men on Dane. Wolfe sighed. As you wish, but if you do it clumsily, he may bolt or destroy what he has. What he has, Kramer repeated. You keep saying that, because I am right. After he left, I said, suppose he has documents. Why not come straight to us, or the police? Because possession is itself incriminating, or profitable, or both. Then why not destroy them? Because documents useful enough to frighten him may also have preserved him until now. Men like Dane do not burn leverage unless fire is physically applied to their cuffs. That was close enough to poetry for Wolfe, and therefore probably true. At dinner Laura came down and got the essentials because I could not keep my face neutral long enough to wait until coffee when I mentioned Harold Dane. She frowned. I know the name, she said. Philip used him later, in politics. Did you ever see him at Black Hollow? Number. That means nothing, I said. You barely saw Daniel Kerr until Saul dragged him out of memory by the heel. She winced, which I deserved, and kept. After coffee in the office, the chapter turned itself another notch. Fred telephoned from Sylvia Bain's apartment. His voice was low. Miss Bain got a call. From whom? Male voice. Controlled. She couldn't place it. He asked whether she had kept faith with the library. I looked at Wolfe. When, 10 minutes ago, he hung up when she said she didn't know what he meant. Wolfe's face did not change, but his eyes got brighter. Good, he said. Good, I repeated. Yes, the pressure is accelerating. The killer or principal coercer now supplements the public cards with direct contact, Laura whispered. Then Sylvia is next. Perhaps, or perhaps she is meant to panic in a useful direction. I said, and Dane is meant to do something before that. Exactly. The telephone rang again. This time it was Saul, and there was something in his voice I liked less than urgency. My man on Dane says he left his office half an hour ago, stopped at no club, no restaurant, and went to a private storage building near Gramercy Park. He is there now. That was enough to get me up. Wolfe's hand lifted. Number sit. Dane may be moving his answer. Yes, and if you rush there, you may frighten him into stupidity. Call Mr. Kramer. Then call Saul back and tell him to watch only. No interference unless Dane removes a parcel. I did both. When I hung up, Wolfe sat with his fingers together, staring not at me but somewhere just to my left where ideas often assemble for him. The cards, he said softly, were meant for one pair of hands, perhaps chiefly. The role of the 1931 dead is the visible mechanism. The true purpose is coercive. Mr. Dane has custody, knowledge or access required for the final movement, I said. And the final movement is? He looked at me. Tomorrow, if we are competent, you may see. That was as near a promise as Wolfe makes before the last act. It was also maddening. The chapter closed there in everything but the clock. George Faber, Helen Rippin, Martin Vale, Philip Tarrant called off in order, Laura 5th, Sylvia 6th, and Harold Dane watching from outside the roll with a fear not of dying in sequence, but of being forced to act before the sequence completed itself. The crimson cards were not merely announcements of death. They were levers, and somewhere in the city, in some storage room or sealed envelope or hidden folio, something waited for Harold Dane's hands to touch it under pressure. Chapter 8. The red notice delivered. Nero Wolfe prefers a full room for the last act, not because he enjoys audiences, which he does only when they are silent, but because guilt behaves badly in company and truth often needs chairs arranged around it. By 6 o'clock that evening, the office on West 35th Street had acquired the proper furniture for exposure. Inspector Kramer was there, broad and impatient in the red leather chair. Sergeant Stebbins stood by the bookcase, looking as if he hoped no one would shoot at the bindings. Laura Frome sat upright on the yellow chair near the window, pale but steadier than she had been in days. Sylvia Bain had been brought downtown by Fred Durkin and was on the Davenport, gloved hands folded too tightly in her lap. Harold Dane sat nearest the door, as if choice of position could still be mistaken for indifference. Sol Panzer leaned against the far wall, wearing the mild face he reserves for moments when a man's future is already in his pocket. Wolfe was behind his desk, installed like a municipal monument to reason and bad temper. Fritz had just brought beer and withdrawn with the air of a chef who disapproves of climaxes if they delay supper. I had my notebook, though by then I scarcely needed it. The papers had all come in. The black folio from Gramercy Park was on Wolfe's desk. So were the duplicate oath sheets, the arrival summary, the old statement forms, and 6 remaining blank crimson cards from the same stock ordered in October 1931 and replenished once in 1938. Kramer had wanted to pounce on Dane the instant Sol's man saw him enter the storage building. Wolfe had wanted the folio first. Wolfe won because he generally does when the issue is brains against urgency. Nobody spoke for nearly a minute. Wolfe let the silence weigh until it behaved like evidence. Then, he said, "Mr. Dane, you have one chance to spare us all your performance, confess." Dane's face did not change much. That was one of his skills. "I have nothing to confess." "Of course you do," Wolfe said. "But I am willing to do the work for you because I prefer accuracy." Kramer grunted. "Start doing it." Wolfe placed one thick finger on the black folio. For years the police sought a motive among professions, scandals and personal quarrels. They looked sideways because corpses lie in the present. The truth lay backward, in Black Hollow House, and in the final season of November 1931. The 4 murdered victims belonged to the same attendance group, and they died in the exact order in which they signed the arrival ledger: George Faber, 1st, Helen Rippin, 2nd, Martin Vale, 3rd, Philip Tarrant, 4th. Miss Frome is 5th, Mrs. Bain, 6th. That established the sequence. Sylvia shut her eyes. Laura looked only at Dane. Wolfe went on. The crimson card was not a madman's flourish. At Black Hollow House, as we now know, it served as a summons to private interview and as the symbol of admission to the midnight library oath. It marked not spectacle, but controlled fear. Therefore, the killer was someone who knew the ritual from within, possessed or reconstructed the attendance order, and wished the surviving witnesses to understand that the old machinery had been reactivated. Kramer said, "We know that much. Number, you know it because I have repeated it often enough to penetrate your skull." Wolfe ignored the inspector's oath and turned to Dane. The interesting question was not who feared death, but who feared the library. Mr. Dane feared it immediately and specifically. Mr. Goodwin visited him yesterday. Mr. Dane denied memory of the ceremony, yet asked twice whether I had mentioned the library. That was fatal, though not in the legal sense. Dane said coldly, "A slip of phrase is not murder." "No," Wolfe said. "Merely panic. Murder came earlier." He lifted one sheet from the folio. "This summary, found in the storage room Mr. Dane rented under an alias, contains the 1931 arrival order, room assignments, interview marks, and private notations. Here also are duplicate statement forms, including one with Miss Rippin's signature first practiced and then forged. Here are the oath texts. Here is a memorandum in Daniel Kerr's hand, objecting to the language of the Corbett Declaration as turning uncertainty into a tested fact. Here also is a later note, unsigned but obviously preserved by Mr. Dane, describing Kerr as unstable and prepared to disclose all. Dane's mouth tightened once. That proves possession of old papers, not homicide. Patience, Wolfe said. Possession explains. Motive, homicide follows. He shifted in his chair, which for Wolfe is the equivalent of a violinist drawing the bow. Black Hollow House was founded by Martin Voss, not Murch, though Murch later administered it. Voss understood the profitable use of gathered shame. He created the library ceremony, the oath, the crimson card, and the principle that mutual compromise enforces obedience better than individual blackmail. In November 1931, the original 6 from the Corbett affair were brought there for consolidation. On the second day, Daniel Kerr arrived as legal advisor. He objected to the declaration concerning Corbett because it turned suspicion into sworn certainty. He also objected, I infer, because he discovered that Helen Rippin's eventual signature was to be obtained by threat or imitation. Laura made a small sound. Sylvia stared at Dane now without blinking. Wolfe continued. That final night in the locked library, Kerr threatened to leave and expose the enterprise, unless certain confessions were returned and certain signatures destroyed. Ezra Phelps heard the shout from outside. The storm covered much, but not that. Now, who was present? The 6 witnesses, Murch as efficient, and one additional man whose existence was later erased from the records just as Kerr's was minimized. He looked at Dane. Harold Dane. Dane gave a short laugh with no mirth in it. Ridiculous. Not at all. Mr. Dane first appeared clearly in our investigation as a later consultant in 1934 and 1937. But that was because the 1931 record of his earlier presence had been removed. Miss Frome did not remember him clearly because he was there not as a principal witness, but as Kerr's junior associate, introduced late, spoken to little, and afterward deliberately omitted. Mrs. Bain did better. This afternoon, after seeing the folio, she remembered a second man standing near the library mantel while Kerr argued. She remembered him because when Kerr said the papers must be burned, that second man said, "You'll ruin us all for a scruple." Sylvia's voice came, brittle but clear. It was him. Dane turned on her. "You are mistaken." "No," she said. "I was frightened then. I am tired now." That landed well. Wolfe nodded once, as if acknowledging a witness he had already accounted for. "Mr. Dane," he said, "was never brave. He was merely gifted at making fear profitable." In 1931, he was attached to Kerr and Philip Tarrant in confidential political and financial matters. He entered the library believing he could help manage the language and preserve his own usefulness. Instead, Kerr broke with the scheme. There was an argument. Kerr threatened disclosure. In panic, Mr. Dane struck him. Kramer leaned forward. "With what?" Wolfe spread a hand. "Possibly the heavy bronze seal listed among Voss's library effects and never inventoried later. The precise object is lost. The result is not. Kerr was disabled if not instantly killed. His jaw and throat bruising later appeared in the county accident report. Murch, who administered the machine Voss had built and understood perfectly how to preserve it, converted the panic at once into structure. Kerr was removed, his death later staged on County Road 9 as an auto accident in the storm, and Murch bound the remaining witnesses, by oath, by their signed papers, and by their belief that each one's ruin now depended on silence. Laura whispered, "My God." "No," Wolfe said dryly, "merely Martin Voss's machine." Kramer jabbed a finger at Dane. "You expect me to hang a murder count from 1931 on this without more than recollection and logic?" Wolfe glared. "Do not be stupid. I expect you to hang 4 recent murders on him and use 1931 as motive, method, and history. The rest is your trade." Then he returned to Dane. "For years you survived because the old records remained useful. You became a fixer, broker, custodian, and trader in confidential damage. When Voss died and Murch weakened, pieces of the archive dispersed. You acquired some, Philip Tarrant acquired knowledge of others, that suited you both, until time made the old arrangement unstable. Philip began asking about Kerr and the statements. Helen Ripon had long ago shown signs of doubt. Sylvia Bain, I infer, either wrote or said enough recently to alarm Philip. Miss Frome received the card only after the fourth death, because by then the attendance sequence could no longer be mistaken. You wanted the last two witnesses in terror before either spoke plainly. Dane's face had gone still in the dangerous way. This is fantasy. No, Wolfe said. Fantasy is cheaper. This is administration. You killed Faber first, because he had grown careless, and because beginning at the head of the roll preserved the old ritual. Ripon second, because she had resisted once and might resist again. Vale third, because he would have met coercion with cool exposure, if cornered. Tarrant fourth, because he had found you, found Haft, and begun to reconstruct the archive. With each murder you left the crimson card where it would be found, photographed, and printed. That was not done for the police. It was done so that Miss Frome and Mrs. Bain would read the sequence and collapse into silence, and so that any remaining custodian of papers would know the roll was being called. I said, an invoice. Wolfe nodded. Yes, red as debt. Kramer said, what about the phone call to Bain? Have you kept faith with the library? Wolfe's lip curled. Mr. Dane could not resist confirming his success. Men of cold appetite often indulge themselves with one superfluous touch. Dane finally moved. Not much, just enough to show that Wolfe had slid the blade between ribs. Suppose I had old papers, he said. Suppose I feared scandal. That still does not make me the killer. Wolfe sighed. Mr. Panzer. Saul straightened from the wall. Yesterday evening Mr. Dane went to the Gramercy storage room and removed nothing. He only checked the folio and a wrapped parcel. After the police secured the room, the parcel was opened. It contained a bronze paperweight from Continental Securities with traces of old cleaning compound in its crevices, one surgical instrument case missing its narrow blade, and a pair of driving gloves with fibers matching those from Tarrant's coat and from the garage mat in Dr. Vale's car. Kramer stood up fast enough to make the chair complain. You kept trophies? Dane said nothing. Wolfe's voice was flat. Not trophies. Tools. Mr. Dane is not theatrical. He is orderly. He preserved what he believed might someday need to be moved, reused, or destroyed. Age had not improved his judgment. Laura Frome was staring at Dane as if she had finally found the shape of something long felt in darkness. Why? She asked. Why now? For the first time, something like weariness touched Dane's face. Not remorse. Men like him seldom bother with that. Only fatigue. Wolfe answered for him. Because old arrangements had begun to leak. Tarrant's inquiries, Bain's memory, Ripon's old doubt lingering in papers, Haft still alive, Miss Frome accessible. Mr. Dane had survived by managing fear, but fear had ceased to stay managed, so he revived the original instrument. The roll, the card, the oath without the words. Sylvia said, he wanted me to despair. Before you could speak with confidence. Terror weakens memory in some and sharpens it in others. He wagered on weakness. Kramer had moved behind Dane now, and Stebbins had stopped looking at books. Dane glanced once toward the door and saw what arithmetic had become. Wolfe leaned back. There is one final point. The newspapers called it a calling card, because newspapers are addicted to foolishness. It was nothing of the kind. A calling card announces identity and seeks entrance. This card announced debt and sought payment. It was an invoice delivered at last to those who had owed the dead too many years. Nobody spoke. Then Dane made the only move left to him. He half rose, not toward the door but toward the desk. Perhaps for the folio, perhaps for Wolfe's throat, perhaps merely because some men would rather lunge than sit still under truth. Kramer and Stebbins took him cleanly enough to spare the furniture. There was a brief, hard scuffle, a curse, one chair over, and then handcuffs. As they got him upright, Dane looked at Sylvia, not Laura. That interested me more than his curses. Sylvia met his eyes and did not drop hers. Kramer said, breathing heavily, You'll make a statement downtown." Dane laughed once, a dry scrap of sound. "Will I?" "Yes," Kramer said. "Or you'll sit while we pile paper on your head until gravity does it." They took him out. When the front door had closed and the house settled back around us, the office seemed suddenly too ordinary for what had been in it. Fritz appeared in the doorway, took in the overturned chair, the faces, and Wolfe's beer, and said only, "Dinner in 10 minutes." That was civilization reclaiming territory. Laura Frome sat very still. "Then all these years," she said, "we were not protecting one another." "No," Wolfe said. "You were preserving a mechanism built by others and used by Mr. Dane. That is the usual fate of people who mistake shared fear for solidarity." Sylvia rose. She looked older than when Fred had brought her in, but also more exact. "And Daniel Kerr." Wolfe's voice softened by about half a degree. "He is still dead, madam, but he is no longer missing." That was enough. More than enough. As for me, I put away my notebook and looked once at the blank crimson card still on the desk. It had begun as absurdity in the papers, then theatricality, then discipline, then a summons, then a symbol of oath, and at the end it turned out to be bookkeeping after all. That pleased Wolfe, who dislikes melodrama unless it can be reduced to accounting. It pleased me too, though less. Murder with style is bad enough. Murder with ledgers is worse. Still, it ended where a Nero Wolfe case ought to end. In the office with the room full, the truth spoken dryly and exactly, and debt at last presented to the man who had sent it red across the years.